The rescue dog teams refuse to search past the marker stones at Tongass. They won't cross that line, no matter the commands or training. After what I've seen on thermal imaging beyond those stones, I don't blame them. My name is Jack Turner, and I have been a park ranger in the Tongass National Forest for 19 years. I have seen grizzly attacks that left men unrecognizable, hikers frozen solid on mountainsides, avalanches that buried entire camps, and storms that rolled in from the Pacific with a fury that seemed personal. I have pulled bodies from glacial rivers and searched for children who wandered off marked paths into wilderness so dense that sunlight never reaches the ground. I thought I had seen everything these ancient forests could throw at me. I was wrong in ways that still wake me screaming in the night. The Tongass is not like other forests. Spanning nearly 17 million acres across southeast Alaska, it is the largest national forest in the United States, a temperate rainforest of such primordial density that there are valleys no human has ever set foot in. The trees here are ancient, Sitka spruce and western red cedar that have been growing since before Columbus sailed, their trunks so massive that 5 men linking hands cannot circle them. The understory is a tangle of devil's club and blueberry bushes, salmonberry and ferns that grow taller than a man. Fog rolls in from the ocean almost daily, reducing visibility to a few feet, muffling sound, creating a world of gray shadows where anything could be hiding just beyond your vision. The forest floor is a carpet of moss so thick and soft that footsteps make no sound, and the constant drip of moisture from the canopy creates a white noise that masks all other sounds. This is not a forest that welcomes humans. It tolerates us at best. And in some places, I have learned, it does not tolerate us at all. The marker stones were placed centuries ago, though no one knows exactly by whom. The Tlingit people who have lived in this region for thousands of years refuse to discuss them. When I have asked elders about the stones, they simply shake their heads and change the subject, their eyes carrying a warning I did not understand until it was too late. The stones themselves are unremarkable at first glance, granite boulders about 3 feet tall, arranged in a rough line that stretches for miles through the forest. They are covered in moss and lichen, blending into the landscape so well that you could walk past them without noticing. But the rescue dogs notice. They always notice. They will track a missing hiker for miles through the most brutal terrain, through rain and mud and underbrush that tears at their fur. But when they reach those stones, they stop. They whine. They circle. They look back at their handlers with expressions that can only be described as fear. And then they refuse to go further, no matter how much their handlers push or encourage or command. After what happened last October, I understand why. It started with a missing persons report. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, a wildlife biologist conducting a study on the Alexander Archipelago wolf population, had failed to check in for 3 days. Her last known position was deep in the interior of Admiralty Island, one of the most remote and dangerous sections of the Tongass. Admiralty is home to one of the densest populations of brown bears in the world, roughly 1 bear per square mile, which is why the Tlingit call it Kutsnuwu, Fortress of the Bears. But bears were not what I was worried about when I received the call to join the search and rescue team. Bears are predictable. They follow patterns, respond to stimuli in ways we understand. What I had begun to suspect was living in the deep interior of the Tongass was not predictable at all. I should explain how I came to suspect anything was wrong in the first place. It started about 2 years before the Hendricks disappearance, with a series of incidents that, taken individually, could be dismissed as coincidence or misidentification. Hunters reported seeing something moving through the forest on 2 legs, something much larger than a man, covered in grayish-brown fur. Hikers described hearing howls at night that did not match any known animal, deep and resonant and somehow wrong in a way they could not articulate. Trail cameras set up to monitor wildlife captured blurred images of something tall and bipedal moving through the frame, always at night, always just outside the range of clear focus. The indigenous communities stopped sending their young men on traditional hunting expeditions in certain areas, citing reasons they would not explain to outsiders. And then the disappearances began. The first was a trapper named Michael Kowalski, a 63-year-old man who had been running a trap line in the interior for over 30 years. He knew the forest as well as anyone alive. His cabin was found empty, the door torn off its hinges, deep gouges raked into the wooden walls. His rifle was still inside, unfired. His supplies were untouched, but there was blood, a significant amount of it. and tracks leading away from the cabin that the initial responders could not identify. They were canine in general shape, but far too large, nearly 8 inches across, with claw marks that dug deep into the frozen ground. The case was officially listed as a bear attack, body never recovered. But I saw the photos. Bears do not leave tracks like that, and bears do not open doors. The second disappearance was a young couple from Seattle, experienced backpackers doing a 3-week traverse of the Tongass. They were found by a fishing boat crew that spotted something on a remote beach. Their tent was still standing, their gear neatly arranged, but they were gone. The only sign of violence was a single bloody handprint on the inside of the tent fabric, as if someone had been dragged out and tried to hold on. No tracks, no other evidence, no bodies. The cold case file is still open. The third was a Park Service employee, a seasonal ranger named Tommy Blackwood, who was doing a solo patrol of a section of trail near Pack Creek. He missed his evening check-in, and when we went looking for him the next morning, we found his pack hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. His radio was inside, still functional. His GPS unit showed his last recorded position about 2 miles from where we found the pack. Of Tommy himself, there was no trace. Just the pack, hanging impossibly high, as if placed there by something that could climb like a primate but had the strength of a machine. I began keeping my own records after Tommy's disappearance. I gathered every strange report, every unexplained incident, every piece of evidence that did not fit the official explanations. I mapped the locations of sightings and disappearances, looking for patterns. What I found chilled me to the bone. All of the incidents occurred in a specific region of the interior, roughly 200 square miles of the most isolated wilderness in the Tongass, and all of them occurred beyond the marker stones. I tried to bring my concerns to my supervisors. I compiled a report, presented my evidence, requested additional resources to investigate. I was told, politely but firmly, that I was letting the isolation and stress of the job get to me. There was no unknown predator in the Tongass. The disappearances were tragic but explicable, accidents and animal attacks in one of the most dangerous wilderness areas in North America. I was offered a transfer to a less demanding post and encouraged to take some time off. I did neither. Instead, I kept researching, reaching out to other rangers who had worked in the area, to indigenous hunters, to scientists who studied predator behavior. Most dismissed my concerns, but a few did not. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a wildlife biologist based in Juneau, had been tracking the Alexander Archipelago wolf population for over a decade. She told me something that stuck with me. She said that wolf behavior in the interior had changed over the past few years. Pack structures were different, territories were shifting, and the wolves seemed to be avoiding certain areas entirely. She showed me her data, GPS collar traces that mapped pack movements. There was a dead zone in the center of the island, a region where no collared wolf had entered in over 18 months. When I overlaid that dead zone on my map of incidents, it matched perfectly with the area beyond the marker stones. I also spoke with an elder named William Skeek, a Tlingit man in his 80s who had hunted these forests his entire life. He was reluctant to talk at first, but when I showed him my map and described what I had found, he grew very quiet. Then he told me a story that his grandmother had told him when he was a child. He said that there are things in the deep forest that are older than the Tlingit, older than the land itself. Spirits that wear the shape of wolves, but walk like men. He called them kushtaka in his language, though he said that was not quite the right word for what I was describing. The kushtaka were shapeshifters, creatures that lured people to their deaths by taking familiar forms. What lived beyond the stones, he said, was something different, something that did not bother with deception. He called it the Eater of the Lost. He said his grandmother had warned him never to go beyond the stones, and he never had. He advised me to do the same. I should have listened. The search for Dr. Hendricks began on a gray October morning, the kind of day when the clouds sit so low they seem to merge with the forest canopy, when the world is reduced to 50 shades of gray and green and the constant sound of dripping water. Our team consisted of myself, Ethan Walker, and Emily Dawson. Ethan was a veteran ranger in his mid-40s, a former Marine who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before finding his calling in the wilderness. He was calm under pressure, methodical, and one of the best trackers I had ever worked with. Emily was younger, early 30s, with a background in emergency medicine and a master's degree in forestry. She had been with the Park Service for 6 years, and despite her relative youth, She was one of the most competent rangers I knew. Together, we made a strong team. I trusted them with my life. We were flown into the interior by float plane, landing on a small lake about 5 miles from Dr. Hendrix's last known position. The pilot, a grizzled man named Pete Sorensen, who had been flying these waters for 30 years, seemed nervous as he dropped us off. He told us to radio for pickup by 5 o'clock, and if we were not at the extraction point by then, he was leaving without us. He did not say why, but I noticed he kept glancing at the tree line, as if expecting something to emerge. When I asked if he had seen anything unusual in the area, he just shook his head and said that he did not fly over this section after dark anymore. Then he was gone, the float plane banking away and disappearing into the clouds, and we were alone in the silence of the ancient forest. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was wrong, heavy, and absolute in a way that went beyond the normal quiet of the wilderness. There should have been birdsong, the chittering of squirrels, the distant call of ravens. Instead, there was nothing but the drip of water from leaves and the creak of branches in the faint wind. The forest felt empty, abandoned, as if every living creature had fled from something we could not see. We hiked for 3 hours, following the GPS track that Dr. Hendrix had logged in her research notes. The terrain was brutal, steep slopes covered in devil's club that tore at our rain gear, creek crossings where the water ran fast and cold, deadfall so thick we had to detour around it for hundreds of yards. But we made steady progress, and by early afternoon, we reached her last known campsite. It was a small clearing near a stream, the kind of spot an experienced wilderness researcher would choose for easy access to water and good drainage. Her tent was still there, a high-quality mountaineering model collapsed on one side as if something heavy had pressed against it. We approached carefully, documenting everything, looking for any sign of what had happened. Emily found the first indication of trouble about 30 feet from the tent. A tree had deep gouges raked into its bark, 4 parallel lines about 7 feet off the ground. The cuts were fresh, the exposed wood still pale, sap still oozing. They looked like claw marks, but they were too high, too evenly spaced, and too deep to have been made by any bear. Ethan found the tracks near the stream. He called us over, his voice carefully neutral in the way it got when he was controlling strong emotion. We knelt beside him, looking at the impressions in the mud. They were canine in general form, with 4 toes and visible claw marks. But they were enormous, easily 9 inches from heel to toe, and the stride length between them was over 5 feet. Whatever had made these tracks was walking on 2 legs. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had seen photos of tracks like these in my research, in grainy images submitted by terrified hunters and hikers, in old newspaper clippings from the early 20th century. The local legends called it Adlet or Wahila, depending on which indigenous tradition you consulted. Cryptozoologists had a different name, one that had gained currency in recent decades through internet forums and paranormal television shows. They called it Dogman. The term sounds ridiculous in the light of day, in the safety of civilization. A man with the head of a dog, walking upright through the forest, preying on the unwary. It sounds like something from a horror movie, from a campfire story told to frighten children. But standing in that clearing, looking at those tracks, feeling the weight of the silent forest pressing down on us, it did not sound ridiculous at all. It felt like the only explanation that made sense. We searched the campsite thoroughly, hoping to find some sign that Dr. Hendrix had simply left, that she was somewhere in the forest, injured perhaps, but alive. What we found instead was her journal, lying open in the tent, the pages warped with moisture but still legible. Her last entry was dated 3 days earlier. It read, "Something has been watching the camp for the past 2 nights. I have not seen it clearly, only movement in the peripheral vision, shapes between the trees when I use my flashlight. The wolves I was tracking have left the area, all of them, in a single night. Their GPS signals are now 10 miles away and still moving. I have never seen pack behavior like this. It is as if they are fleeing from something. I should leave too. I know that. But the scientist in me wants to understand what could frighten an apex predator. I have set up my trail camera pointed at the tree line. Tomorrow, I will review the footage. If there is anything worth reporting, I will radio base camp. If not, I will pack out as planned." There was no footage on the trail camera. The SD card was missing. We found her pack a quarter-mile from the campsite, torn open and scattered across the forest floor. Her satellite phone was smashed, the pieces ground into the mud as if someone had stomped on them deliberately. Her rifle was there too, a heavy-caliber weapon appropriate for bear country. It had been fired. We counted 7 shell casings at the scene, but the rifle itself was bent, twisted in the middle, as if caught in some enormous vise and wrenched out of true. The barrel was at a 45-degree angle to the stock. I could not imagine the strength required to do that to a steel-barreled weapon. There was blood on the ground, a significant amount of it, and drag marks leading away into the forest. We followed them for about 100 yards before they ended at the base of a massive Sitka spruce. Looking up, we saw Dr. Hendricks, or what remained of her, wedged into a fork in the branches about 60 feet off the ground. She had been placed there deliberately, like a leopard caching its kill, and she had been partially consumed. Emily turned away and vomited. Ethan stood very still, his hand on his sidearm, his eyes scanning the surrounding forest. I forced myself to look, to document what I was seeing, even as my mind screamed at me to run. This was not the work of any animal I knew. Bears cannot climb trees with any agility, and they do not cache their kills. Mountain lions are not found in this region. Wolves do not place prey in trees, and none of those predators could have bent her rifle like that. I photographed what I could from the ground, knowing we would need evidence, knowing that without proof, no one would believe what had happened here. Then I radioed base camp, gave them our coordinates, and requested immediate extraction. The response was crackled and faint, the mountains and cloud cover interfering with the signal. I thought I heard Pete's voice say something about weather moving in, about delays, but the transmission cut off before I could be sure. We were on our own. Ethan was the first to suggest we move. He said that whatever had done this might still be in the area, and we were not equipped to deal with it. He was right. We had sidearms and 1 rifle between us, not nearly enough firepower to take on something that could bend steel and climb trees with a 100-pound body. Our best chance was to get back to the lake, get to the extraction point, and get the hell out of this forest before dark. We moved quickly, abandoning any pretense of stealth in favor of speed. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing closer, the undergrowth thickening, as if the wilderness itself was trying to slow us down. The silence continued, oppressive and total, broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of our boots on the moss. I kept checking our bearing on the GPS, making sure we were heading in the right direction, terrified that we would get turned around and lost in this green maze. We had been hiking for about an hour when Ethan stopped suddenly, holding up his fist in the military signal for halt. Emily and I froze. Ethan pointed to his ear, then to the forest on our left. I listened, straining to hear whatever had caught his attention. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard it. Breathing. Heavy, rhythmic breathing, coming from somewhere in the trees about 50 yards away. It was too loud to be human, too steady to be any animal I could identify. It sounded like a bellows, like something massive drawing air into enormous lungs. We stood motionless, barely daring to breathe ourselves. The sound continued for perhaps 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. Something was out there, something large, and it knew we were here. Ethan gestured for us to continue, and we did, moving faster now, almost jogging through the underbrush. My heart was hammering in my chest, my mouth dry with fear. I could feel eyes on us, could sense something tracking our movements from the shadows. The forest was no longer neutral territory. It was hostile, actively trying to prevent our escape. Branches seemed to reach for our clothing. Roots rose up to trip us, and the fog thickened until we could barely see 20 feet ahead. We crossed a stream, the cold water soaking through our boots, and started up the slope on the other side. That was when we saw the stones. A line of granite boulders, moss-covered and ancient, stretching away into the fog on either side. The marker stones. We had reached the boundary. For a moment, I felt relief. If the legends were true, if whatever hunted here stayed beyond the stones, then we just needed to cross them, and we would be safe. I was about to step forward when Emily grabbed my arm. She pointed at the ground in front of the stones, and I saw what she had seen. Tracks. The same enormous canine prints we had found at the campsite, but fresher, the edges still sharp in the mud. They ran parallel to the stones for as far as we could see in either direction, pacing back and forth like something patrolling a fence line. Something was guarding the boundary. Something that did not want us to leave. Ethan drew his rifle and chambered a round, the metallic sound shockingly loud in the silence. Emily pulled out her sidearm. I did the same, though I had little confidence that our weapons would be effective against whatever was out there. We spread out slightly, covering different angles, and prepared to make our move. I will never forget what happened next, as long as I live. The thing came out of the fog like a nightmare made flesh. It was enormous, easily 7 feet tall when it dropped to all fours, but it was not on all fours when we first saw it. It was standing upright, its massive body covered in coarse gray-brown fur, matted with something dark and wet. Its legs were jointed wrong, bent backward like a dog's hind legs, but supporting a torso that was almost humanoid in shape. Its arms were long and heavily muscled, ending in hands that were halfway between a human's and a wolf's paw, with opposable thumbs and curved black claws several inches long. But it was the head that stopped my heart. The skull was elongated, lupine, with a long snout filled with teeth that gleamed white in the dim light. The ears were pointed and erect, swiveling independently like radar dishes, tracking every sound we made. And the eyes, God help me, the eyes. They were yellow, bright yellow like a wolf's, but they held an intelligence that no animal should possess. They looked at us with awareness, with recognition, with what I can only describe as hunger. It stood there for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for the reality of its existence to burn itself into my brain, long enough for every legend and whispered story to crystallize into absolute certainty. Then it opened its mouth and howled. The sound was indescribable. It was like nothing I had ever heard, a vocalization that combined the howl of a wolf with something else, something almost human, a scream of rage and triumph that seemed to shake the very trees. It echoed through the forest, bouncing off the mountains, and from somewhere in the distance, more howls answered. There were others, many others, and they were converging on our position. Ethan fired first. The rifle roared, and I saw the creature jerk as the round struck its shoulder. It staggered but did not fall. Instead, it looked down at the wound with what might have been surprise, then looked back at us with an expression I will never forget. It was anger, pure and absolute, the rage of a predator confronted by prey that dared to fight back. Then it charged. It moved impossibly fast for something so large, covering the distance between us in seconds, dropping to all fours as it ran. Ethan fired again and again, the shots deafening in the enclosed space. Emily was shooting too, her pistol barking in quick succession. I raised my own weapon and pulled the trigger, not even aiming, just trying to put rounds in the direction of that nightmare form. Some of our shots hit, I know they did. I saw the creature flinch, saw dark blood spray from wounds that should have been fatal. But it kept coming, unstoppable, a force of nature that our modern weapons could only annoy. It hit Ethan first. One massive arm swept out and caught him across the chest, lifting him off his feet and throwing him 10 feet through the air. He hit a tree with a sickening crack and slid to the ground, motionless. The creature did not pause. It pivoted toward Emily, who was backing up, still firing, her face a mask of terror. I screamed something, I do not remember what, and charged at the thing, hoping to distract it, to buy her time to run. It was like hitting a wall of muscle and fur. I slammed into its side with all my weight and bounced off, sprawling in the mud. The creature glanced down at me almost dismissively, then reached for Emily. She tried to dodge, but it was too fast. Its hand closed around her throat and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. She kicked and struggled, her hands clawing at the massive fingers that were crushing her windpipe, her face turning red, then purple as the oxygen was cut off. I scrambled to my knees and raised my pistol, trying to find a shot that would not hit Emily. The creature saw me, saw the threat, and with a casual flick of its wrist, it threw her aside. She hit the ground hard and did not get up. Then it turned its full attention to me. I fired my remaining rounds point blank into its chest. The creature grunted with each impact, dark blood welling from the wounds, but it did not stop. It reached down and grabbed my arm, its grip crushing, its claws puncturing my skin. I screamed as it lifted me to eye level, bringing my face close to its muzzle. I could smell its breath, hot and fetid, like rotting meat and something else, something musky and wild. Its lips pulled back from its teeth in what might have been a smile. It could have killed me then. It should have, but instead it studied me, those yellow eyes boring into mine, as if trying to understand what I was, why I had come here, what I represented. The intelligence in that gaze was terrifying. This was not a mindless beast acting on instinct. This was a thinking creature, making a decision about my fate. Then it dropped me. I hit the ground hard, the air driven from my lungs, my arms screaming with pain. The creature stood over me for a moment, still staring, then threw back its head and howled again. The answering calls were closer now, coming from all directions. I understood then what it was doing. It was summoning the others. It was calling them to witness its victory. I do not know how long I lay there, paralyzed with pain and fear, waiting for the end, but the end did not come. Instead, I heard a sound I did not expect, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. The creature heard it too. Its ears swiveled toward the sound, and something changed in its posture. Not fear exactly, but caution. Wariness. It looked at me one more time, and I could swear I saw something like calculation in its eyes. Then it turned and loped away into the fog, moving with a fluid grace that belied its massive size, disappearing into the forest as if it had never been. The helicopter appeared a few minutes later, a Coast Guard rescue craft that had been diverted from another mission when our base camp reported us overdue. They found us scattered across the clearing like broken toys. Ethan was dead, his spine severed by the impact with the tree. Emily was alive but barely, with a crushed larynx and severe spinal injuries that would leave her paralyzed from the waist down. I had a shattered arm, deep puncture wounds, and lacerations from the creature's claws that would become infected despite aggressive treatment. They never found Dr. Hendrix's body. By the time a recovery team could be sent in, it was gone. The tree where she had been cached was empty, only dried blood and some torn fabric remaining to prove she had ever been there. The official report listed all 4 of us as victims of a bear attack, with Hendrix and Walker killed at the scene, Dawson and myself surviving with injuries. There was no mention of the tracks we had found, the bent rifle, the cache in the tree, or the creature that had attacked us. The photos I had taken were confiscated for the investigation and never returned. The statement I gave was edited to remove any reference to what I had actually seen. I was told, in no uncertain terms, that if I wanted to keep my job, I would accept the official version of events. I was reminded that unexplained phenomena in national parks are bad for tourism, bad for the service's reputation, and bad for public morale. I was encouraged to seek counseling for my trauma and to take as much medical leave as I needed. The implication was clear: keep quiet or face the consequences. I kept quiet. For 6 months, I said nothing to anyone outside the approved narrative. I went through the motions of recovery, physical therapy for my arm, psychological counseling for the nightmares that plagued my sleep. I told the therapists what they wanted to hear, that I was processing my trauma, that I understood the bear attack was not my fault, that I was moving past the experience. I lied because the truth would have gotten me locked in a psychiatric ward. I lied because no one would have believed me. I lied because I was terrified of what might happen if the creatures learned I was talking about them. But I could not stay silent forever. Not when I knew what was out there. Not when hikers and hunters and researchers continued to enter the Tongass, unaware of what waited for them beyond the marker stones. Not when the disappearances continued, 1 or 2 per year, always in the same region, always officially attributed to accidents or animal attacks. The service knew. They had to know. The patterns were too clear, the evidence too consistent. But they chose to look the other way, to protect the institution and the tourism dollars and the illusion that nature was something we could control. I started reaching out to others, carefully at first, testing the waters. I found the cryptozoology forums, the paranormal investigators, the researchers who studied phenomena that mainstream science refused to acknowledge. Most of them were crackpots, true believers who saw dogmen behind every shadow and dismissed any attempt at skeptical analysis. But a few were serious, methodical, approaching the subject with the rigor it deserved. I shared my experience with them, anonymous at first, then under my real name as I grew bolder. They shared their own research, sightings from around North America, historical accounts going back centuries, indigenous legends that matched my observations in disturbing detail. The creature I had encountered was not unique. Reports of similar beings dated back to the earliest European settlements in North America. The Ojibwe had legends of the Wendigo, a cannibalistic spirit that walked like a man. The Iroquois spoke of the Gahonga, wild men of the forest who preyed on unwary travelers. The Norse settlers who reached North America before Columbus recorded encounters with beings they called Skraelings, which historians assumed referred to indigenous peoples but which might have described something else entirely. In the modern era, sightings were concentrated in heavily forested regions of the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, and Canada, areas where large swaths of wilderness remained untouched by development. The creatures seemed to prefer old-growth forests, areas where the trees were ancient and the ecosystems undisturbed. They were territorial, staying within defined ranges that they defended against intruders. They were intelligent, using coordinated hunting strategies and demonstrating awareness of human technology. They were elusive, leaving little physical evidence and actively avoiding detection. And they were dangerous, responsible for an unknown number of disappearances over the centuries, deaths that were attributed to other causes or simply never explained. I learned that the marker stones I had seen in the Tongass were not unique either. Similar boundary markers had been reported in forests across the continent. Ancient stones placed in lines that seemed to delineate territories. Who had placed them was unclear. Some researchers believed they were the work of indigenous peoples, warnings established generations ago to mark the boundaries of the creatures' ranges. Others suggested the creatures themselves had placed them, marking their territory in a way that other intelligent beings could understand. A few theorists proposed something even stranger, that the stones were far older than human presence in North America, placed by whoever or whatever had shared the land with these creatures before we arrived. The more I learned, the more I understood how little we truly know about the world we live in. We map satellites in orbit and particles in colliders, but vast stretches of our own planet remain unexplored. The deep ocean, the mountain peaks, the dense forests where no road leads and no trail penetrates. We assume that anything large and dangerous would have been cataloged by now, that modern science has accounted for every significant species. But the Tongass alone contains thousands of square miles where no human has ever set foot. The boreal forests of Canada and Siberia stretch even further, millions of acres of primordial wilderness. In such spaces, an intelligent, elusive predator could thrive for millennia without ever being confirmed by science. Emily Dawson never fully recovered from her injuries. The paralysis was permanent, the result of damage to her lower spinal cord. She lives in Juneau now, in a wheelchair-accessible apartment near the harbor, working a desk job for the Forest Service that she hates. I visit her when I can, though it is hard. She remembers everything that happened, every detail, every moment of terror. She has the same nightmares I do, the same cold sweat at 3 a.m, the same instinct to check the shadows for yellow eyes. But she cannot run anymore, cannot even walk. And the helplessness of that haunts her worse than the memories. She told me once that she wished the creature had killed her, that death would have been better than this half-life, this constant reminder of what she had lost. I did not know what to say to that. I still do not. The guilt of surviving when Ethan did not, of escaping when Emily was maimed, weighs on me every day. I was the senior ranger. I was the one who knew the risks, who had researched the dangers, who should have refused the mission, or at least prepared us for what we might face. Instead, I led them into a nightmare and barely made it out myself. 2 years after the incident, I resigned from the Park Service. I could not go back into the field, could not face the forest that had taken so much from me. The official reason was medical retirement, the lasting effects of my injuries. The real reason was fear, pure and simple. Fear that if I went back, I would encounter them again. Fear that next time, I would not be so lucky. Fear that the creature that had spared me would decide it had made a mistake. I moved to Anchorage, as far from the Tongass as I could get while still remaining in Alaska. I took a job as a security consultant, using my wilderness experience to help businesses plan for remote operations in dangerous areas. It was boring, safe work, and I hated every minute of it. But it kept me away from the forest. It kept me alive. I started writing my account about a year after I left the service. I needed to get it down, to process what had happened, to create some record in case something happened to me. The writing was therapeutic at first, a way to confront my trauma in a controlled setting. But as I worked, it became something more. It became a warning. A message to anyone who might venture into the wild places without understanding what waited there. A document that might save lives if anyone took it seriously. I shared the manuscript with a few trusted contacts, researchers who studied cryptid phenomena, former rangers who had their own unexplained encounters, indigenous elders who recognized what I was describing. Their feedback was encouraging. Some added their own stories, accounts that corroborated my experience, and suggested that the Tongass creatures were part of a larger population spread across the continent. Others provided historical context, legends and reports going back centuries that matched modern sightings in disturbing detail. Together, we began to assemble a picture of a hidden world existing parallel to our own, a world where human beings were not the apex predators we imagined ourselves to be. The Dogman, as the popular imagination has named them, seem to be apex predators in the true sense. They have no natural enemies, nothing that threatens them except perhaps each other. They are stronger than bears, faster than wolves, smarter than any animal we have catalogued. They hunt in packs, coordinating their attacks with a sophistication that suggests language, or at least complex communication. They use the terrain to their advantage, ambushing prey from hidden positions, herding targets toward kill zones. They understand human technology, avoiding trail cameras, disabling vehicles, destroying communication equipment. They know what a rifle is and what it can do, which is why they close the distance so quickly, why they target armed individuals first. They have been observing us for a long time, learning our capabilities, developing countermeasures. We are not hunting them, they are hunting us. The question of what they are remains unanswered. Some researchers believe they are a relic population of prehistoric canids, descended from dire wolves or some other ancient species that diverged from the main evolutionary line millions of years ago. Others propose a parallel evolution, a different branch of the primate family tree that developed in isolation. A few suggest something even more radical, that they are not native to Earth at all, that they arrived here at some point in the distant past and have been living alongside us ever since. I do not know which theory is correct. What I know is what I saw, a creature that walked on two legs like a man, but with the head and teeth of a wolf. A predator that killed with casual efficiency and displayed intelligence that should have been impossible. A being that looked at me with yellow eyes and made a choice, a decision, to let me live when it could just as easily have ended my life. That moment of calculation, of weighing options and selecting an outcome, is what haunts me most. It suggests a mind behind those eyes, a consciousness that thinks and plans and considers. It suggests that when we enter their territory, they are not reacting to us as animals react to intruders. They are making choices about what to do with us, and most of the time, they choose to kill. Why did it spare me? I have asked myself that question 1,000 times. I have no good answer. Perhaps the helicopter interrupted before it could finish its work. Perhaps it was curious about me, about this human who had fought back instead of running. Perhaps it wanted me to survive, to carry a message back to my kind, a warning to stay away. Or perhaps it simply was not hungry that day, had already fed on Dr. Hendricks and Ethan, and saw no point in killing something it did not need to eat. I will never know for certain. The uncertainty is its own form of torture. The Tongass remains largely unchanged. The forest is still there, 17 million acres of old-growth timber, the largest temperate rainforest in North America. Tourists still fly in to see the glaciers and the bears and the whales. Hikers still walk the trails, camping in the wilderness, believing themselves safe in the heart of nature. The Park Service still sends rangers on patrol, monitoring wildlife and maintaining trails and rescuing the occasional lost soul. The marker stones still stand, moss-covered and ancient, marking the boundary that separates our world from theirs. And beyond those stones, in the deep interior where the fog never lifts and the sun rarely penetrates, they are still there, watching, waiting, hunting. The disappearances continue, though they are rarely reported as such. A hiker who never returns from a solo trek. A hunter who vanishes during a 2-week expedition. A research team that loses a member to what the official report calls a bear attack. Each case is investigated, filed, and forgotten. Another tragedy in a dangerous wilderness. Another reminder that nature is not a theme park, and the mountains do not care about human ambitions. The families mourn, the files are closed, and life goes on. But I know the truth. I know what is taking them, and I know that no one with the power to do something about it is willing to admit that the dogmen are real. I tried to go public once. About 3 years after I left the service, I gave an interview to a documentary crew making a film about unexplained phenomena in Alaska. I told them everything, showed them my scars, provided copies of the documents I had retained despite orders to surrender them. The film was released on a streaming platform and briefly generated some buzz in cryptozoology circles, but the mainstream response was predictable. Skeptics dismissed it as fabrication. Officials denied everything. The Park Service released a statement calling me a disgruntled former employee with a history of mental health issues. My ex-wife was contacted by reporters and told them I had always been prone to fantasy. Within a month, the story was dead, buried under the constant churn of news and entertainment that defines modern life. I do not blame people for not believing. The claims sound insane, I know that. A wolfman in the forest, hunting humans like prey, displaying intelligence and communication. It sounds like a campfire story, like a movie monster, like the kind of thing that cannot exist in a rational world. We are trained from childhood to believe that the world is known, cataloged, explained, that science has answered the big questions and is merely filling in details, that things like dogmen are fantasies, relics of a superstitious age before we understood how nature really works. It is comforting to believe that. It is much less comforting to accept that there are holes in our understanding big enough to hide monsters. I think about the Tlingit elders sometimes, about William Skeek and his grandmother's warning. His people had lived alongside these creatures for generations, long before Europeans arrived with their rifles and their certainty and their contempt for anything they could not explain. They knew the dangers, respected the boundaries, taught their children to stay away from the forbidden places. They did not try to hunt the dogmen or study them or prove their existence to skeptics. They simply acknowledged them, incorporated them into their understanding of the world, and lived accordingly. Perhaps that was wisdom. Perhaps the proper response to the unknown is not to conquer it, but to coexist with it, to find the lines that keep both sides safe and to stay on the right side of those lines. But that is not the human way, not the Western way, certainly not the American way. We cannot leave the mysteries unsolved, the territories unexplored, the beasts uncatalogued. We must go everywhere, know everything, control all that we encounter. And so we build trails into the wilderness and send tourists to gawk at the scenery, and hunters to bag their trophies, and researchers to count the animals, and surveyors to map the terrain. We push deeper and deeper into the last wild places, believing our technology makes us safe. Our rifles make us powerful. Our civilization makes us untouchable. We are wrong. In the deep forest, in the fog and the silence, our technology fails and our rifles are toys and our civilization means nothing. There, we are prey, and the predators are patient. I am 57 years old now. My arm still aches where the creature's claws pierced the muscle, an old injury that flares up in cold weather. I walk with a slight limp from a knee that never quite healed after the fall. My sleep is still broken by nightmares, vivid dreams of yellow eyes and hot breath and teeth that gleam in the fog. I have never gone back to the Tongass, never set foot in any deep wilderness, never spent a night outside the reach of electric lights and paved roads. I have become what I never thought I would be, a city dweller. A man who fears the forest that was once his home. The creatures took that from me, along with my career and my peace of mind and any belief I once had in a rational, explicable world. Emily Dawson called me last month. She had news, she said. News that might interest me. A friend of hers still in the service had told her something in confidence. They were establishing a new protocol for the Tongass interior, mandatory satellite tracking for all personnel, doubled patrol sizes, revised emergency procedures. More importantly, they were erecting a new boundary, a line past which no ranger would be permitted to go under any circumstances. The line followed the marker stones almost exactly. No official explanation was given, just orders from headquarters to be followed without question. The friend thought it might be related to budget cuts, reduced staffing, risk management. Emily knew better. They were finally acknowledging the boundary, formally accepting what the Tlingit had known for centuries. Beyond the stones, humans do not belong. I do not know if this represents a victory or merely damage control. The creatures are still there, still hunting anyone foolish enough to enter their domain. Tourists and hunters and researchers are still going missing, still being consumed by official silence and convenient explanations. The truth is still buried under layers of denial and bureaucratic protection, but at least someone with authority has recognized the danger. At least some line has been drawn, some boundary established, some attempt made to keep people safe. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is something. I have one more thing to share before I end this account. About 6 months after the incident at the Tongass, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and poorly lit, clearly taken with a trail camera in low-light conditions. The image showed a clearing in a forest, and in the center of the clearing stood a figure. It was one of them, a dogman, standing upright and facing the camera. In its hands, held up as if being displayed, was a human skull. The skull was fresh, with tissue still clinging to the bone, and it had been marked somehow, painted or carved with symbols I did not recognize. The creature's yellow eyes were looking directly at the lens, as if it knew it was being photographed, as if it wanted the image to be captured and sent. On the back of the photograph, someone had written 3 words in neat block letters. "Remember you." I burned the photograph. I told no one about it, until now. But I understood its message. The creature that had spared me, that had let me escape to tell my story, was still watching. It knew who I was, where I lived, what I was doing. It had access to cameras, to mail systems, to the mechanisms of human society. It was intelligent enough to use these tools, sophisticated enough to deliver a message across thousands of miles. And it wanted me to know that I was not forgotten, that my survival was not an escape, but merely a postponement. That if it ever decided to finish what it had started, it could find me. I live with that knowledge every day. I lock my doors at night and check my windows and jump at sounds in the darkness. I avoid the wilderness, avoid the forest, avoid anything that reminds me of the fog-shrouded woods where I lost my friends and nearly lost my life. I am not safe. I will never be safe. None of us are safe. Not really. Not as long as they are out there, watching and waiting and remembering. We build our cities and light our streets and tell ourselves we have tamed the world. But beyond the lights, in the places where the old trees grow and the fog never lifts, the dogmen watch. They have been there longer than we have. They will be there when we are gone, and in the meantime, they hunt. This is my account, my warning, my confession. I have written it because someone needs to know the truth, because the families of the disappeared deserve to understand what happened to their loved ones, because the next ranger or hiker or hunter who ventures into the wrong part of the wilderness should have a chance, however slim, of recognizing the danger before it is too late. I do not expect to be believed. I do not expect anything to change. But I have spoken the truth as I know it, and that is all any of us can do. The rescue dog teams refuse to search past the marker stones at Tongass. They won't cross that line, no matter the commands or training. After what I have seen on thermal imaging beyond those stones, I don't blame them. The thermal shows heat signatures out there, large ones moving in patterns that suggest intelligence and coordination. They pace the boundary, patrol it, watch for anyone foolish enough to cross. They are waiting for us. For the next human who thinks they know better, who believes their rifle and their GPS and their satellite phone will keep them safe. It will not. Nothing will. Beyond the stones, we are not at the top of the food chain. Beyond the stones, we are meat. I close my eyes sometimes, and I am back there, in the fog, with the smell of blood and wet fur filling my nostrils. I see Ethan hitting the tree, see Emily being lifted off the ground, see those yellow eyes looking into mine with an intelligence that should not exist. I feel the claws in my arm, feel the hot breath on my face, feel the certainty of death that somehow did not come, and I ask myself why. Why me? Why did I survive when the others did not? What purpose did my survival serve? I do not have answers, only questions. And the knowledge that somewhere in the Tongass, in the ancient forest that was old when humanity was young, something remembers me. Something is waiting. And if I ever give it the chance, it will finish what it started. Do not go beyond the marker stones. Do not venture into the deep wilderness alone. Do not assume your weapons will protect you or your technology will save you. The dogmen are real. They are watching, and they are hungry. This is my testimony. May God have mercy on anyone who ignores it. The years since the incident have taught me many things about the nature of secrecy and the bureaucracy of silence. I have come to understand that the institutions we trust to protect us are often more interested in protecting themselves. The Park Service, the Forest Service, the various agencies charged with managing our public lands, they all know something is out there. The evidence is too consistent, the patterns too clear for them not to know. But acknowledging the existence of apex predators that prey on humans would have consequences. Lawsuits from the families of victims, congressional investigations into what was known and when, collapsed tourism industries in regions that depend on outdoor recreation, mass panic as people realize that the wilderness they love is not a playground but a hunting ground. So they keep quiet. They attribute deaths to bears and accidents and exposure. They classify the troubling reports and transfer the rangers who ask too many questions. They protect the lie because the truth is too expensive. I understand the calculus, even as I despise it. In a world of limited resources and competing priorities, what benefit comes from acknowledging the dogmen? We cannot hunt them to extinction, not when we do not know how many there are or where they live. We cannot capture them, not when they seem capable of evading any trap we set. We cannot negotiate with them, not when we do not know if they even have a concept of negotiation. All we can do is what we have always done: avoid them, mark the boundaries, stay on our side of the line. The indigenous peoples figured this out thousands of years ago. They did not try to conquer the monsters in the woods. They accepted them as a fact of life and adjusted their behavior accordingly. Perhaps that is the wisdom we need to rediscover. But I fear we will not. I fear that our nature compels us to push, to explore, to challenge every boundary and claim every territory. I fear that as the population grows and the wilderness shrinks, the conflicts will increase. More hikers will wander into forbidden zones. More researchers will probe into mysteries they should leave alone. More hunters will pursue game into areas that should remain untouched, and more of them will not come back. The dogmen will defend their territory, as they always have, and we will mourn our dead and write reports that attribute the losses to accidents and attacks by known predators. The truth will remain buried, and the killing will continue, and nothing will change until something forces it to change. I sometimes wonder what it would take to break the silence. What magnitude of incident would be required to pierce the veil of denial and force a public acknowledgement? A mass casualty event, perhaps, where dozens of people are killed in a single night. A high-profile victim whose disappearance cannot be swept under the rug. Video evidence so clear and compelling that it cannot be dismissed as a hoax. But even then, I am not sure anything would change. The will to disbelieve is strong, and the institutional incentives to maintain denial are powerful. We saw a similar dynamic with other threats that authorities refused to acknowledge until it was too late. The precedents are not encouraging. What I know for certain is that the dogmen are not going away. They were here before us, and they will be here after us. They have survived ice ages and extinctions and the rise and fall of countless species. They have adapted to changing environments, learned to avoid modern threats, evolved strategies for hunting prey that can shoot back. They are survivors in the truest sense, a species that has persisted against all odds for millions of years. Compared to them, human civilization is a brief flicker, a temporary disruption in the long history of their dominance. If we do not learn to respect their boundaries, to coexist without confrontation, I believe they will outlast us as they have outlasted everything else. This sounds fatalistic, I know. It sounds like surrender, like an abdication of human responsibility to understand and manage our world. Perhaps it is. But after what I have seen, after what I have lost, I have come to accept that there are things beyond our control. Forces older and stronger than our civilization, minds that think in ways we cannot comprehend, territories that are not ours to claim. The forest beyond the marker stones belongs to them. It always has. And the sooner we accept that, the fewer people will die. I am an old man now by most measures, though not as old as I feel. The weight of my memories ages me beyond my years. I have grandchildren I rarely see, a family I have largely lost touch with, a life that amounts to little more than existence in a small apartment in a medium-sized city. I go to the grocery store and the doctor's office and the occasional movie, and I try not to think about the thing that is still out there, still watching, still remembering. Sometimes I succeed for days at a time, and life feels almost normal. Then something triggers the memories, a news story about a missing hiker, a documentary about wolves, a foggy morning that recalls the eternal twilight of the Tongass, and I am back there again, in the clearing, with the creature's eyes burning into mine. I do not know how much longer I have. The doctors say my heart is weakening, the result of years of stress and too much alcohol and not enough care. They give me pills and advice and cautionary warnings, and I nod and promise to do better, and then I go home and pour myself a drink and stare at the walls. The nightmares will end soon, one way or another. I am not sure if that thought brings relief or dread. What I hope is that this account survives me, that someone reads it and takes it seriously, that the warning I offer saves even one life, prevents even one family from experiencing the loss that destroyed mine. That would be enough. That would make my survival mean something, would give purpose to the borrowed time I have been living on since that October day in the Tongass. Do not go beyond the marker stones. That is my final message. The summary of everything I have learned and everything I have lost. The forest is not empty. The wilderness is not safe. The things you have been told do not exist are real, and they are hunting, and they do not distinguish between the foolish and the wise, the young and the old, the innocent and the guilty. They see only prey. They see only meat. And if you enter their domain, you will learn this truth in the worst possible way. The rescue dogs know. They can sense what their human handlers cannot. The wrongness that permeates the deep forest, the presence of predators beyond anything in their experience or training. They refuse to cross the line, no matter the commands or incentives, because every instinct they possess tells them that death waits on the other side. We would be wise to learn from them. We would be wise to stay on our side of the stones, to respect the boundaries that were established long before we arrived, to accept that there are places on this earth that are not meant for human beings. But we will not. We never do. And so the killing will continue, and the families will mourn, and the reports will attribute the deaths to accidents and animals and misadventure. The truth will remain hidden, protected by silence and denial, and the simple fact that it is too terrible to accept. I have said what I came to say. I have offered my warning. The rest is up to you. The fog is coming in now, rolling up from the harbor, filling the streets with gray. Through my window, I can see it swallowing the city, softening the lights, muffling the sounds. It reminds me of the Tongass, of the perpetual twilight beneath the ancient trees, of the silence that pressed down like a physical weight. For a moment, just a moment, I imagine that I see something moving in the fog, something large and purposeful, something that walks on two legs with a canine head held high. But that is impossible. I am in the city. I am safe. They cannot reach me here, can they? The question haunts me as I watch the fog thicken, as the night presses against my window, as the weight of memory settles onto my shoulders like a shroud. 19 years of service in the wilderness, and this is how it ends, in a small apartment, alone with my fear and my memories and the certain knowledge that somewhere out there, beyond the reach of lights and civilization, they are waiting. They remember me. And someday, perhaps, they will come. Until then, I watch the fog, and I remember the Tongass, and I pray that anyone reading this will be wiser than I was. The marker stone stands silent in the forest. The boundary remains. And beyond it, in the darkness that never fully lifts, the yellow eyes are watching. Always watching. This is Jack Turner, former park ranger, sole survivor of the Tower Creek incident. This is my testimony. May God have mercy on your soul if you choose to ignore it. The ancient forest keeps its secrets, and the dogmen keep the forest. Remember that. Remember it always, and stay on this side of the stones. Park protocol requires us to report any structures we find that are not on the maps. In 4 years at Joshua Tree, I filed 0 reports. I found 11 structures. There are things we are better off not knowing about. But then I transferred to Black Hills National Forest, and everything I thought I knew about keeping secrets, about looking the other way, about the comfortable distance between what we see and what we acknowledge, all of it shattered like glass against stone. My name is Jack Turner. I have been a forest ranger for 16 years, the last 7 spent in the shadow of those ancient ponderosa pines that blanket the Black Hills of South Dakota. Before I tell you what happened, before I describe the events that ended my career and nearly ended my life, I need you to understand something fundamental about the job. Being a ranger is not about protecting nature from people. It is about protecting people from what lives in nature. And sometimes, when the sun drops behind those ridgelines and the darkness floods through the valleys like black water, we are utterly powerless to protect anyone from anything. The Black Hills are old. Not old like your grandfather's pocket watch or the colonial buildings on the East Coast. Old like the bones of the earth itself. The Lakota called them Pahasapa, the heart of everything that is. They believed these hills were sacred, a place where the boundary between the physical world and the spirit world grew thin as morning frost. I used to think that was beautiful mythology, the kind of story you tell tourists to add mystery to their vacation photos. I do not think that anymore. Now I know the Lakota were not creating mythology. They were issuing warnings. I transferred to Black Hills National Forest in the spring of 2018, leaving behind the desert heat of Joshua Tree for something greener, something that felt more alive. The posting came with a small cabin near Pactola Reservoir, a government vehicle that was older than some of my co-workers, and a partner named Ethan Cole, who had been working the hills for almost 2 decades. Ethan was the one who trained me. Tall, weathered, with hands like old leather and eyes that had seen too much and forgotten none of it. He spoke slowly and chose his words with care, like a man who understood that some things, once said, could never be taken back. On my first night patrol, driving the winding roads through stands of pines so thick the headlights barely penetrated, Ethan told me the rules. Not the official rules, not the ones printed in the Ranger Handbook or posted on signs at trailheads. The real rules, the ones that kept you alive. Rule 1, he said. Never investigate sounds after midnight. If you hear something in the woods past 12, you radio it in, you note the location, and you move on. You do not stop. You do not shine your spotlight into the trees. You do not try to identify the source. You move on. Rule 2. If you find a structure that is not on the map, you do not enter it. You do not photograph it. You do not mention it to anyone except me or the district supervisor. You mark the GPS coordinates in your personal notebook, not the official log, and you walk away. Rule 3. The caves are off limits after dark, all of them, no exceptions. I do not care if you hear screaming coming from inside. I do not care if someone radios that they are trapped in there. After sunset, those caves belong to something else, and we do not interfere. I laughed when he told me these rules. Nervous laughter, the kind that tries to push back against creeping unease. Ethan did not laugh. He did not smile. He just kept driving, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, and after a long silence he said something that stayed with me. He said, "Jack, I have lost 4 partners in 19 years. 2 of them broke the rules. The other 2 followed them perfectly and still ended up dead. These hills do not play by consistent logic. They have their own rules that change depending on factors we cannot perceive. All we can do is maximize our odds. Follow the rules I gave you. Stay alert. And when something feels wrong, trust that feeling and get out. Your instincts know things your rational mind refuses to accept." I wanted to ask about his 4 dead partners. I wanted to demand explanations, details, something concrete I could wrap my skeptical mind around. But the look on his face stopped me. There was grief there, old and calcified, the kind that never fully heals. So I kept quiet and watched the darkness press against the windows and wondered what exactly I had signed up for. The first 6 months passed without incident. I hiked the trails, assisted lost tourists, cleaned up illegal campsites, monitored for wildfires, and did all the mundane work that fills most of a ranger's days. The Black Hills were beautiful in ways that surprised me. The cathedral spires of granite rising above the tree line. The way morning mist clung to the valleys like something alive. The herds of bison that roam through Custer State Park, massive and prehistoric, reminders that this land was wild long before humans arrived, and would remain wild long after we were gone. I almost forgot about Ethan's rules, almost convinced myself they were hazing rituals, stories told to scare new rangers, nothing more. Then October came, and with it came the first disappearance. Her name was Michelle Warren, 34 years old, experienced hiker, physical therapist from Minneapolis. She had done dozens of solo hikes across the upper Midwest, documented them all on social media. inspired others to explore the natural world. She came to Black Hills for a 3-day backpacking trip along the Centennial Trail, signed in at the Northern Trailhead on October 7th, and was never seen again. Search and rescue deployed within 48 hours of her missed check-in time. I was part of the team that combed the section of trail she should have covered on her first day. We found her campsite, tent still standing, sleeping bag rolled out, food hung properly in a bear bag. Everything was there except Michelle. No signs of struggle, no blood, no disturbed ground. Just an empty tent and a half-eaten granola bar sitting on a flat rock like she had set it down mid-bite and simply ceased to exist. The official report called it a possible wildlife encounter, body not recovered. That was the standard language for cases like this, cases where someone vanished without explanation. But I saw the campsite. I walked the perimeter with Ethan, and I noticed something the official report did not mention. A structure, barely visible through the trees about 200 yards northeast of where Michelle had pitched her tent. It was a stone cairn, maybe 4 feet tall, made of flat rocks, stacked with deliberate precision. Not natural, not random. Someone had built it, placed each stone with care, and it was not on any map. I pulled out my phone to photograph it, and Ethan grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No photographs," he said. "Remember the rules." I argued that this could be evidence, that it might be connected to Michelle's disappearance, that we needed to document everything. Ethan shook his head slowly. "That cairn has been there longer than the trail has existed," he said. "Longer than the park has existed. I found it myself in 2003, marked it in my notebook, came back the next week, and it was in a different location, 300 yards south of where I first saw it. Came back a month later and it was gone entirely. Then it appeared again near Harney Peak in 2006, same cairn, same stones. I recognized the pattern of lichen on the topmost rock." He looked at me with those old, tired eyes. "Structures that move, structures that should not exist. You can study them, Jack. You can document them privately. But the moment you try to bring official attention to them, the moment you try to make them real in the bureaucratic sense, bad things happen. People disappear, evidence vanishes, and sometimes the structures come looking for whoever was foolish enough to notice them." I did not photograph the cairn. I noted its location in my personal notebook, and when I returned to that spot 1 week later, it was gone. The ground undisturbed, no evidence it had ever existed. Michelle Warren was the first disappearance of that autumn. She was not the last. David Chen vanished on October 19th, a wildlife photographer from Portland who had come to capture images of elk during the rut. His rental car was found at a trailhead near Sylvan Lake, keys still in the ignition, camera bag sitting on the passenger seat. The camera itself was missing. Search teams found nothing, not a footprint, not a fiber, not a single sign that David Chen had ever set foot on that trail. Rebecca and Marcus Foster disappeared together on October 28th, a married couple from Chicago celebrating their 20th anniversary with a week in the hills. They had reservations at a lodge near Deadwood, were supposed to check in at 3 p.m. The lodge called us at 7 when they failed to arrive. We traced their planned route, a scenic drive through Spearfish Canyon with stops at various overlooks. We found their SUV at one of those overlooks, parked neatly, doors locked, their luggage still in the back. Cell phones on the dashboard, displaying the time they had last been used, 2:17 p.m. Whatever happened to them took less than an hour, maybe less than minutes. 4 people gone in 3 weeks, all experienced outdoors enthusiasts, all careful planners, all vanished without a trace from one of the most heavily patrolled national forests in the country. The regional office sent additional personnel. The FBI opened an investigation. Local news started running stories about a possible serial killer operating in the Black Hills. But Ethan and I knew better, or at least we suspected something that could not be spoken aloud in official channels, because each disappearance site had something in common, something the investigators never noticed because they did not know to look for it. Each site was within 500 yards of a structure that was not on any map. Michelle Warren's campsite near the moving cairn. David Chen's trailhead within sight of an abandoned mining shaft that had been sealed in 1947, according to records, but somehow stood open and gaping when we searched the area, then was sealed again when investigators returned the next day. The Foster's overlook parking lot adjacent to what appeared to be the foundation of a cabin that no historical record mentioned. Stones arranged in a perfect square, covered in symbols that looked like writing, but matched no language I could identify. I started keeping detailed notes. I should not have. Ethan warned me not to, but I could not help myself. 4 people were missing, possibly dead, and I needed to understand why. I needed to find patterns, connections, something that made sense. So I researched. I dug through old ranger reports going back decades. I found more disappearances, dozens of them, stretching back to the 1950s when the National Forest was first established. And before that, records from the mining days, from the gold rush era, mentions of prospectors who walked into the hills and never returned, of entire survey teams that vanished overnight, of Native American warnings that certain areas were cursed, forbidden, places where even animals refused to go. The disappearances clustered, not randomly, not evenly distributed across the forest. They clustered around specific locations that matched my private list of unmapped structures: the cairn, the sealed and unsealed mine, the cabin foundation, and others I found in my research. A circle of standing stones near Bear Butte, never officially documented, appearing in exactly one photograph from 1973 before the negatives mysteriously degraded. A wooden platform high in the trees near Roughlock Falls, visible in a single aerial survey from 1961, never photographed again. An underground chamber near Needles Highway that appeared on a topographical map from 1942 was removed from all subsequent editions and allegedly collapsed in 1945, despite several hikers reporting they had sheltered in it during storms as recently as 2015. The structures existed. They moved. They appeared and disappeared according to no discernible schedule, and people who encountered them tended to vanish. I brought my research to Ethan on the 1st of November. We were in his cabin, the wood stove burning against the autumn chill, coffee going cold in cups neither of us had touched. I spread my notebooks across his table, showed him the patterns, the correlations, the impossible coincidences that stopped being coincidences when you saw enough of them. He listened without interrupting. Read through my notes with that careful, measured attention he brought to everything. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me with something that might have been sadness or might have been fear. "You see it now," he said. "You understand why we do not report the structures, why we pretend they are not there." I said I understood, but also that I did not understand. How could we ignore something that was connected to disappearances? How could we keep doing our jobs, protecting visitors, when something in these hills was taking people and we were choosing to look the other way? Ethan poured himself more coffee, even though his cup was still full. "I asked those same questions my first year here," he said. "Demanded answers, pushed for investigations. You know what happened? The investigators came. They studied my reports. They interviewed me for hours. And then one of them, a Park Service official from Washington whose name I never learned, took me aside and showed me something." He paused, staring into his coffee like it held secrets. "A photograph," he said, "taken in 1967, Black Hills, near where Bluebell Lodge stands today. The photo shows a group of rangers, 9 of them, standing in front of a structure. A cabin, single room, log construction, no windows. They were smiling. They had found something unexplained, and they were proud, excited, ready to make it official." Another pause. "None of those rangers survived the month. 2 heart attacks, 1 car accident, 1 drowned in a lake that was 6 inches deep, 4 vanished without a trace, and the 9th, the one who took the photograph, he lived the longest, made it almost 3 weeks. They found him in his cabin, sitting in his chair, eyes wide open, face frozen in an expression that the coroner described as impossible to reconcile with any known cause of death. He had not been touched. No violence, no poison. He had simply died, and whatever killed him had terrified him so completely that the fear remained frozen on his face. I asked Ethan what happened to the photograph. "The official destroyed it," he said. "Burned it in front of me, told me that some documentation creates connections, and connections work both ways. We can look at the structures, but when we document them, when we make them official, they start looking back." I wanted to dismiss this as superstition, as trauma response, as anything except what it sounded like, a rational man describing an irrational reality, but I had seen too much. The moving cairn, the sealed mine that unsealed itself, my own notebooks, filled with patterns that should not exist. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Just keep letting people disappear?" Ethan finished his coffee. "We do our jobs," he said. "We patrol during daylight. We help lost hikers. We prevent fires. We clean up campsites. and we accept that some things are beyond our control. Some things are beyond anyone's control. The structures have been here since before the Lakota arrived. They will be here long after we are gone. We are caretakers of a forest that contains something we cannot fight, cannot understand, and cannot escape. The best we can do is minimize contact, follow the rules, and hope that whatever lives in those hills stays satisfied with occasional tribute. Tribute. He said the word like it meant something specific, something he did not want to explain. I pushed for more, demanded to know what he meant. He refused to elaborate, said there were things I was not ready to hear, that knowing too much could be as dangerous as entering the structures themselves. That conversation happened on November 1st. 12 days later, Ethan Cole disappeared. I was the one who found the scene. He had been doing a routine evening patrol, checking campsites along Iron Creek before sunset, a route he had done thousands of times. When he missed his 11 p.m. check-in, I drove out to look for him. His vehicle was parked at the Iron Creek trailhead, engine cold, doors locked. His flashlight sat on the hood, still turned on, beam pointing into the woods. I followed the beam with my own light. 40 yards from the vehicle, I found his hat. Another 20 yards, his radio, cracked like it had been dropped from a height. And beyond that, at the edge of where my flashlight could reach, I saw something that made me stop breathing. A doorway. Not a door. A doorway. Freestanding. Made of wood so old it looked petrified, gray and weathered, carved with symbols similar to the ones I had seen on the cabin foundation where the Fosters vanished. The doorway stood alone in a small clearing, no walls connected to it, no structure around it, just a frame and a darkness within it that my flashlight refused to penetrate. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably seconds. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was impossible, that doorways did not stand alone in forests, that the darkness inside should have been illuminated by my beam. The deeper part, the part that Ethan had spent months training, screamed something else entirely. Run. I ran. Back to my vehicle, radio for backup, report an officer down, possible abduction, unknown circumstances. By the time other rangers arrived, 40 minutes later, the doorway was gone. The clearing where it had stood was empty. Normal. Just trees and undergrowth and the autumn carpet of fallen needles. They found Ethan's hat and radio where I had seen them. They found his footprints leading into the clearing. And then, nothing. The footprints ended mid-stride like Ethan had been lifted straight up or had simply stopped existing. The official report said Ethan Cole went missing during routine patrol. Possible wildlife encounter. Body not recovered. The same language they used for all the others. The same lie they told themselves to avoid facing what we all knew but refused to acknowledge. I took leave after Ethan's disappearance. 2 weeks at first, then extended to a month. I told my supervisor I needed time to process the loss of my partner. That was partly true, but the real reason I needed time was because I had decided to do something that every rule, every instinct, every memory of Ethan's warnings told me not to do. I was going to find answers. My research had shown me that the disappearances clustered, that the structures appeared in patterns, that there was something connecting all of it even if I could not see the full picture. I was going to assemble that picture. I was going to understand what was happening in the Black Hills, and if possible, I was going to stop it. The first thing I did was gather every scrap of documentation I could find, not official records. Those were useless, scrubbed clean of anything that might suggest something unexplainable. I sought out former rangers who had worked the Black Hills and retired. I found relatives of the disappeared, people who might have seen or heard something that never made it into reports. I tracked down academic papers from anthropologists who had studied Lakota oral traditions, looking for any mention of forbidden places or malevolent entities in the hills. What I found was worse than I expected. The Lakota had a name for the things that lived in Pahasapa. I will not write it here. Writing it feels like inviting attention, and I have already invited too much. But the translation roughly meant those who watch from between, and the stories about them were consistent across generations. They were old, older than humans, older than the hills themselves, according to some accounts. They existed in a space adjacent to our world, visible only under certain conditions, touchable only in certain places. The structures were their markers, their doorways, their connection points between their realm and ours. When a structure appeared, it meant they were watching. When a structure moved, it meant they were hunting. And when a structure stood open, when its doorway or entrance or threshold was accessible, it meant they were feeding. The Lakota did not enter areas where structures were known to appear. They did not speak the names of those who had been taken. They left offerings at the boundaries of forbidden zones, gifts meant to appease whatever lived there, to convince it to leave their people alone. Sometimes the offerings worked. Sometimes they did not. This matched what Ethan had said about tribute. The occasional disappearance, the random hiker or camper taken without warning. Perhaps these were a form of tribute, a price paid for using land that was never truly ours. But if that was true, if the disappearances were a kind of dark rent collected by something ancient and hungry, then why the increase? 4 people in 3 weeks was more than the forest had seen in decades. Something had changed. Something had disturbed the balance. I spent days going through my notes, looking for anything unusual in the weeks before Michelle Warren vanished. Construction projects, mining permits, archaeological surveys. Anything that might have touched one of the sacred sites, or disturbed a structure, or drawn the attention of those who watch from between. I found it on a Thursday afternoon, buried in a county planning document that had nothing to do with the National Forest directly. A telecommunications company had installed a new cell tower on private land adjacent to the forest boundary on September 15th. The tower was positioned on a hill called Little Devil's Tower by locals, a granite outcropping that rose sharply above the surrounding pines. The name should have been warning enough, but the company had obtained all necessary permits, conducted all required environmental assessments, and constructed the tower without incident. According to my research, Little Devil's Tower was the site of a documented structure, a stone chamber beneath the rock, accessible through a narrow fissure, mentioned in exactly one surveyor's report from 1889 and never referenced again. The surveyor who documented it died 3 days after filing his report, trampled by a horse that reportedly showed no fear of humans before or after the incident. The cell tower had been built directly above the chamber. I drove out to Little Devil's Tower the next morning. The access road was gated, marked with warnings about private property and authorized personnel only. I parked on the shoulder and hiked in, following game trails through the dense pine forest until I could see the tower rising above the tree line, its red lights blinking against the gray November sky. The feeling hit me about 200 yards from the base, a pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened, a sound just below the threshold of hearing, a vibration in my bones rather than my ears, and a smell, faint but unmistakable, something organic and rotten that had no place in the clean mountain air. I stopped. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to leave this place, to forget I had ever found it. But Ethan was gone. 4 innocent people were gone, and I needed to understand why. I kept walking. The tower stood in a cleared area at the summit of Little Devil's Tower, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. The construction crew had blasted away a section of the granite to create a level foundation, and in doing so, they had exposed something that should have remained hidden. The fissure mentioned in the 1889 surveyor's report was visible at the edge of the blast zone, a crack in the rock maybe 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, angling down into darkness. The construction crew had clearly seen it. They had even placed orange safety cones around it, standard procedure for any potential hazard on a work site. But they had not sealed it. They had not filled it in. They had left it open, perhaps intending to address it later, perhaps simply forgetting about it as the project concluded and the workers moved on to other jobs. I stood at the edge of that fissure and shone my flashlight into the depths. The beam penetrated maybe 20 feet before being swallowed by darkness so complete it seemed almost solid. And from that darkness, rising on air that was too cold for the depth, came a sound. Not wind, not settling rock. A voice, speaking in no language I recognized, rhythmic and monotonous, like someone reciting prayers or perhaps warnings. I left, quickly, did not look back. Drove straight to the district office and demanded to speak with the supervisor, a career bureaucrat named Harold Sims, who had been shuffling papers in national forests for 30 years and wanted nothing more than to coast to retirement without incident. "The tower has to come down," I said. "The construction exposed something that needs to be sealed. People are dying because of it." Harold looked at me like I had suggested we burn down the entire forest. The tower is on private property, he said. The Forest Service has no jurisdiction, and even if we did, you are asking me to demand the removal of critical telecommunications infrastructure based on what? Old Lakota legends? A hole in the ground? Some theory you cooked up while grieving the loss of your partner? I tried to explain, showed him my notes, my research, the patterns I had discovered. He listened with the patient condescension of someone who had no intention of taking action but wanted to appear reasonable. When I finished, he collected my notebooks and told me to take more time off. He said the stress of Ethan's disappearance had clearly affected my judgment. He said he would hold on to my research materials for safekeeping and review them when time permitted. He said if I continued making unsupported accusations about private companies, I could face disciplinary action. I knew what he was doing, protecting himself, protecting the system, burying evidence as it had been buried for decades. But I was too tired and too frustrated to fight him. I agreed to more leave. I went home to my cabin, and I started planning. If the Forest Service would not act, I would act on my own. The fissure at Little Devil's Tower needed to be sealed. The connection between our world and whatever lurked in those depths needed to be severed. I did not know if it would stop the disappearances, but doing nothing was clearly failing. I spent 2 days gathering supplies, concrete mix, rebar, a generator and portable mixer. Enough material to fill that fissure permanently, to create a plug so dense and deep that nothing could pass through it. I loaded everything into my personal truck, planning to hike it up the hill in stages, working at night when no one would see me, finishing before anyone could stop me. The night I chose to act was November 19th. Overcast skies, no moon visible, temperature hovering just above freezing. Perfect conditions for working unseen. I parked off the road about a mile from Little Devil's Tower and started ferrying equipment through the forest. 4 trips in total, stacking everything just outside the chain link fence. The feeling returned as soon as I started working. That pressure, that sound below hearing, that rotting smell on the cold air. But I pushed through it, cutting the fence with bolt cutters, dragging bags of concrete mix to the edge of the fissure, setting up my generator and mixer. I had just finished my first batch of concrete when the voice started. Not from the fissure this time, from behind me, from the darkness of the surrounding forest. It said my name, Jack Turner. Spoken slowly, like the speaker was testing the sounds, learning how to shape them. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the black. Nothing visible, just pine trunks in shadow and the red blinking lights of the cell tower above. The voice came again. From a different direction now. Jack Turner, you should not be here. I kept my light moving, searching for the source. Still nothing. This place is not for you, the voice said, now coming from somewhere to my left. Go back. Leave this alone. Forget what you have learned. I found my voice somehow. What are you? What happened to Ethan? Silence for a long moment, then laughter, low and wrong, coming from everywhere at once. Ethan Cole understood, the voice said. He knew the rules. He followed them for 19 years, and when he broke them, when he came too close to understanding, he was taken, as all who learn too much are taken, as you will be taken if you continue. I dumped the concrete into the fissure anyway, hands shaking, heart hammering, but moving on sheer desperate determination. The gray slurry poured into the darkness, filling part of the opening, beginning the seal I had come to create. The voice screamed. Not words, just sound. A shriek that seemed to come from the ground itself, rising through the fissure, vibrating in my chest with enough force that I staggered backward. The temperature plummeted, my breath fogged. Frost formed on the concrete mixer, on the bags of dry mix, on my jacket and gloves. And then they emerged, from the trees, from the shadows, from places where nothing should have been standing. Figures, tall and thin, limbs too long, joints bending at angles that hurt to look at directly. Their faces were blank, smooth expanses where features should have been. They moved without walking, gliding across the frozen ground, converging on the cleared area around the tower. I counted 7 of them, then 12, then more, emerging faster than I could track. They formed a ring around me, blocking any escape route, their blank faces all turned in my direction. One of them stepped forward, larger than the others, more defined, and unlike its companions, it had features, a face carved from shadow, eyes that burned with dim red light, a mouth that opened to reveal teeth that were too long and too sharp and too numerous. You were warned, it said, its voice the same one that had spoken from the forest. Ethan Cole warned you. The rules warned you. And still you came here. Still you tried to seal what must remain open. I asked what they wanted. Why they were taking people. Why they could not leave us alone. The thing with the face smiled. Its smile was worse than the blank expressions of the others. This is our territory, it said. It has been ours since before your ancestors descended from trees. We tolerate your presence because you are useful. Your fear feeds us. Your confusion sustains us. Your disappeared ones join us, become part of us, strengthen us. This is the arrangement. This has always been the arrangement. What about the tower? I demanded. Did building it make you angry? Is that why more people are disappearing? Another smile, wider this time, showing more of those impossible teeth. The tower opened paths that were closing, it said, woke things that were sleeping, reminded us how hungry we have become. Your machines pierce the earth, send signals through spaces you do not understand, create vibrations that resonate with old chambers and sealed doorways. You think you own this world. You think your technology gives you dominion. But all you have done is make it easier for us to reach you, to touch you, to take you. The ring of figures tightened. They were close enough now that I could have touched them, if touching them would not have meant something worse than death. Their presence burned cold, radiating a chill that went beyond temperature, that reached into places physical cold could never touch. The faced thing raised one long arm, pointing at the fissure where my concrete was slowly setting. Your seal means nothing, it said. You cannot close doorways by filling them with rock. The doorways are not physical. They are not fixed. They are wherever we choose them to be. That hole in the ground is convenient, yes, but we do not need it. We can appear anywhere in these hills, in any forest, in any dark place where the barriers between worlds grow thin. You cannot escape us by running. You cannot stop us by sealing. You can only accept what you are. Pray. I asked why they were telling me this. Why not just take me like they took the others? The thing's red eyes burned brighter. Because you are useful, it said. You have learned much. You have documented patterns. You understand, at least partially, what we are. We want you to spread that understanding. We want you to tell others. We want the fear to grow. Fear feeds us. Confusion sustains us. The more your kind fears these forests, fears the dark places, fears what they cannot see or control, the stronger we become. So I was to be their messenger, their prophet, sent back to the world of the living to spread terror in their name. The thing gestured, and the ring of figures parted, creating an opening toward the path I had used to hike in. Go, it said. Leave this place. Tell everyone what you have seen. Warn them that the deep places are not safe, that the old territories are reclaiming themselves, that every national forest, every wilderness area, every patch of dark trees far from human habitation holds things like us, watching, waiting, occasionally feeding. Spread the word, spread the fear, and know that we will be watching you always, Jack Turner. We will be in every shadow you pass, every dark room you enter, every dream that wakes you sweating in the night. You belong to us now, even if we choose not to take you. You will never be free. You will never feel safe. And that fear, that constant dread, will sustain us for as long as you live. I ran, through the opening in the ring, down the hill, through the forest, to my truck. Engine starting, tires spinning, vehicle lurching onto the road and accelerating into the darkness. I did not look back. I was afraid of what I might see in my mirrors, afraid of what might be following. I drove for 3 hours before I stopped. A gas station in Rapid City, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a bored attendant barely glancing up from their phone. I sat in my truck and shook, tried to process what had happened, tried to convince myself it was hallucination, breakdown, delayed reaction to Ethan's death. But I knew it was real. The frost was still on my jacket, the cold was still in my bones, and when I checked my phone, I found something that erased any remaining doubt. A photograph I did not remember taking. The timestamp said 3:27 a.m., sometime during my encounter at Little Devil's Tower. The image showed the fissure, my concrete mixer, the bags of dry mix scattered around. Normal enough, except for the figures in the background, dozens of them. tall and thin, faceless and watching. And standing among them, closer to the camera than any of the others, was a figure I recognized. Same height, same build, same ranger uniform he had been wearing the night he disappeared. Ethan Cole, but changed. His face was blank now, smooth like the others. His limbs were longer than they should have been. His posture was wrong in ways I could not articulate. He had become one of them, joined them, been transformed into whatever they were. And in the image, his blank face was turned toward the camera, toward me. And even without features, without eyes, I could feel him watching, accusing, warning. I resigned from the Forest Service the next day. Did not go back to my cabin, just called and told them to ship my belongings wherever they wanted. I moved across the country, to a city as far from forests as I could get. An apartment in a concrete building surrounded by concrete streets and concrete towers. No trees, no wilderness, no dark places where things might watch from between. But they were right. I am never free. I am never safe. Every shadow makes me flinch. Every sound in the night pulls me from sleep. I dream of pine forests and stone chambers and doorways standing alone in darkness. I dream of Ethan's blank face watching me from crowds of the faceless. I wake sweating, shaking, knowing that they are still out there, knowing that they are still watching. And I tell this story, as they wanted, as they commanded, because people need to know. People need to understand that the wilderness is not empty, that the dark places hold things beyond comprehension, that every disappearance in every national forest might be more than accident or animal attack or simple human error. Something lives in those spaces, something old and hungry and patient, something that has been there since before we built our cities and our roads and our illusions of control. The Black Hills are beautiful. The redwoods are majestic. The ancient forests of this continent are wonders worth seeing, worth protecting, worth experiencing. During the day, they are gifts, cathedrals of nature, places where the soul can breathe. But when darkness comes, leave. Do not stay past sunset. Do not investigate strange sounds. Do not photograph structures that are not on the maps. Do not try to understand things that do not want to be understood. The rules exist for a reason. Ethan taught me that. I learned it too late. Those who watch from between are real. They have always been real. And they are hungry in ways we cannot comprehend, patient in ways we cannot match, present in places we refuse to admit. I am their messenger now, their warning voice. The fear I spread feeds them, but perhaps it also saves lives. Perhaps someone reading this will heed the warning, will choose daylight over darkness, will follow the rules, will survive. And perhaps, if enough people fear the forests after dark, if enough people stay away from the deep places, those who watch will remain satisfied. Perhaps the occasional disappearance will be enough tribute. Perhaps they will continue tolerating our presence, our cities, our illusion that we have conquered nature. Or perhaps nothing we do matters. Perhaps we are cattle in a pasture we cannot see, tended by farmers we cannot comprehend, harvested according to schedules we cannot predict. Perhaps the only difference between those who disappear and those who survive is random chance, the arbitrary selection of beings so far beyond us that our actions have no influence on our fates. I do not know. I will never know. But I know this: the forest has rules. Breaking them has consequences, and the darkness holds things that do not show up in photographs until they want to be seen. Stay safe. Stay in the light. And never, ever forget that some places are not ours. Some places were never ours. And after dark, those places belong to something else entirely. This is the testimony of Jack Turner, former ranger at Black Hills National Forest. I am writing it from a city apartment where I sleep with every light on and still wake screaming. I am writing it because they told me to, because the fear must spread, because knowing is better than ignorance, even when knowledge brings no power to fight back. Ethan Cole disappeared on November 13th. Michelle Warren, David Chen, Rebecca, and Marcus Foster joined him. They are all still in those hills, I think, changed, watching, waiting for more to join them. How many more will it be this year, next year? How many hikers and campers and photographers and curious tourists will walk into darkness and never return? I cannot stop it. No one can stop it. The most we can do is minimize our exposure, follow the rules, and hope that when the feeding comes, it does not come for us. The Black Hills are waiting. Those who watch from between are always watching. And somewhere in the darkness, Ethan Cole stands faceless among them, wearing the uniform he wore in life, serving masters he never chose, trapped in a service that will never end. I pray for him sometimes. I pray for all of them. But I know those prayers fall on ears that have no interest in mercy. The forest takes what the forest wants, and the forest wants more, always more. The disappearances are accelerating. I check the news every day, looking for stories from national forests across the country, missing hikers, vanished campers, search efforts that find nothing. The numbers are climbing. Whatever door was opened at Little Devil's Tower, whatever balance was disturbed when that cell tower pierced the earth and sent signals through hidden chambers, the effects are spreading. It is not just the Black Hills anymore. Reports from Redwood, from Olympic, from Great Smoky Mountains and Yellowstone and Glacier and a dozen other parks I never worked, never visited, never thought about until the pattern became impossible to ignore. The same stories everywhere, people entering wilderness areas and failing to return. Search teams finding abandoned equipment, empty campsites, trails that end mid-step as if the hiker had simply stopped existing. They are waking up. All of them. Those who watch from between, wherever they sleep, whatever domains they claim, they are stirring from long patience into active hunting. I do not know why. The cell tower might have been one cause, but it cannot be the only one. Perhaps the world has changed in ways that make their emergence easier. Perhaps the barriers between their realm and ours have been thinning for years, decades, centuries, and we are only now reaching the point where they can cross freely. Perhaps they simply decided, for reasons we cannot fathom, that the time for tolerance is over. Whatever the cause, the effect is clear. The forests are becoming dangerous in ways they have not been for generations. The old stories, the ones our ancestors told around fires to keep children close and safe, those stories were true, are true, will be true for as long as humans exist to tell them. Do not go into the woods after dark. Do not investigate strange sounds. Do not trust structures that appear where no structures should be. Do not photograph things that defy explanation. And if you see figures in your photos who were not there when you took them, if you feel watched in places where nothing visible watches, if you hear voices speaking in languages that have no earthly origin, run. Do not hesitate. Do not investigate. Do not try to understand. Just run, because understanding will not save you. Nothing will save you once they notice you. The best you can hope for is to never draw their attention in the first place. I drew their attention. I am paying the price. The fear never ends. The watching never stops. They are in every shadow, every dark corner, every nightmare that wakes me gasping. But I am alive, damaged, broken, but alive. Follow the rules, stay in the light, and maybe, if you are lucky, if you are careful, if you never forget that the wilderness is not yours to control, you will stay alive too. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the truth I was commanded to spread. The forest is not empty. The darkness has teeth. And those who watch from between are always, always watching. Remember that. And be afraid. Fear might be the only thing that keeps you alive. 3 months have passed since I left the Black Hills. 3 months of city lights and concrete walls and the constant noise of urban living that keeps the silence at bay. I thought distance would help. I thought maybe if I stayed far enough from forests, far enough from wilderness, far enough from any place where trees grow thick and shadows gather deep, I could escape. I was wrong. The mail arrived last Tuesday. Bills, advertisements, the usual junk. And one item that did not belong, a postcard with no return address. The image on the front showed a forest path, sunlight filtering through pine branches, the kind of scenic shot you find in tourist gift shops. The writing on the back was in Ethan's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. The same neat block letters he used for reports, for notes, for the entries in his personal notebook that I had read after his disappearance. The message was short. We are still watching. The trees miss you. I called the police, showed them the postcard. They said there was no way to trace it. No way to determine who sent it or from where. They suggested it was a prank, someone who knew about my history and wanted to scare me. They did not believe me when I told them the truth. No one believes me. That is part of it, I think. Part of their design. The fear I spread is dismissed as delusion, trauma response, the ravings of a man who lost his partner and broke under the strain. I tell my story and people nod sympathetically and recommend therapists, medications, support groups for those who have experienced loss. But I see it in their eyes sometimes. The doubt, the flicker of fear that maybe, just maybe, I am telling the truth. That maybe the forests really do hold something beyond explanation. That maybe their next camping trip, their next hike, their next walk through wooded trails could be their last. That doubt is what they want. That tiny seed of fear that grows in the back of the mind, whispering warnings in the dark, making people flinch at shadows and second-guess their plans to visit wilderness. Every person who hesitates before entering a forest, every family that chooses the beach over the mountains, every hiker who turns back before sunset because something feels wrong. They all feed those who watch. And so, I am useful, even in my exile, even in my fear. I am a tool they use to spread themselves, to extend their influence beyond the boundaries of their physical domains. Every time I tell this story, every time someone reads these words and feels that cold trickle of doubt, they grow stronger. I hate it. I hate being their instrument, but I cannot stop. The compulsion to speak, to warn, to share what I know, it burns in me like fever. When I try to stay silent, the nightmares grow worse. When I try to forget, I find myself writing anyway. Words appearing on pages I do not remember opening. Testimony flowing from fingers I do not remember moving. They own me. They made that clear at Little Devil's Tower. And ownership, for beings like them, extends across any distance. There is no escape. There is only continuation. Day after day, after endless day of fear and watching, and the certain knowledge that eventually, when they tire of my service, they will come for me. I wonder sometimes if that will be a relief. If joining them, becoming faceless and eternal, losing myself in whatever collective existence they share, would be better than this endless waiting. Ethan is there. Ethan is part of them now. At least I would not be alone. But then I remember his blank face in that photograph, the wrongness of his transformed body, the emptiness where a person used to be. And I know that whatever waits on the other side, it is not peace, it is not rest, it is something beyond life and death, beyond identity and dissolution, something that makes ending look like mercy. So I continue. I survive. I tell my story to anyone who will listen and many who will not. I follow the rules even here in the city. Never entering dark places alone, never photographing shadows, never speaking the names I learned in my research. And I wait. The trees miss me, the postcard said. Maybe one day they will reclaim me. Maybe one day I will walk into a park, a small urban green space that should be safe, and find a doorway standing where no doorway should be. Maybe I will step through, finally, and find Ethan waiting on the other side with his blank face and his two long limbs and his silence that speaks louder than words. Until then, I am here. I am watching. I am warning. Do not trust the forests. Do not trust the darkness. Do not trust any place where the old things sleep and dream and occasionally wake to feed. The rules exist for a reason. Follow them. Survive. And never, ever forget that some territories are not ours. Some places belong to something else, something ancient, something hungry, something patient, something watching, always watching, forever. The end is not really an end. Endings suggest closure, resolution, the comfortable fiction that stories conclude and life moves on. But this story has no ending because those who watch do not end. They continue. They persist. They outlast. I check the news every morning now, scanning headlines for stories from national forests. The disappearances continue. A family of 4 in Sequoia, 2 college students in Shenandoah, a solo backpacker in Denali who live-streamed his hike until the feed cut to static and silence. The comments under that video are full of speculation. Equipment failure, wildlife attack, hoax. No one mentions what I see in the final frames before the feed died. A figure standing among the trees, tall and thin, its blank face turned toward the camera. It is there for maybe 2 seconds. Most viewers miss it entirely. I do not miss it. I recognize them everywhere now. In news footage, in travel photographs, in the backgrounds of tourist videos and nature documentaries. They are always there, just barely visible, hidden in plain sight among the trees and shadows. A pale shape that could be a birch trunk, but is not. A dark spot that could be a shadow, but moves when nothing else does. Eyes that burn red for single frames before the camera shifts away. No one else sees them, or no one else admits to seeing them. The human mind is remarkably good at filtering out things that do not fit its model of reality. We see what we expect to see, ignore what we cannot explain, construct narratives that maintain our comfortable delusions of safety and control. I have lost that ability. The filter is gone, stripped away that night at Little Devil's Tower. I see the world as it actually is, full of watchers and hunters and things that wear darkness like clothing. I see them in the parks and forests, in the shadows of buildings, in the peripheral vision that most people dismiss as tricks of light. They are everywhere. They have always been everywhere, and they are getting bolder. Last week, I saw one in the alley behind my apartment building, standing motionless next to a dumpster, its blank face turned toward my window. I watched it for 3 hours, not moving, not blinking, not daring to look away. When dawn finally came, it was gone. But it left something behind, a mark on the wall, carved into the brick with something sharper than any tool I know. Symbols like the ones on the standing stone, like the ones on the doorway that took Ethan, like the ones that appear in my nightmares and wake me screaming. I am marked now, claimed. The city provides no protection because the city is just another kind of forest. Steel and concrete instead of wood and stone, but the same shadows, the same dark places, the same thin spots where the boundaries between worlds wear through. There is no escape. There never was. But there is warning. There is testimony. There is the hope, however small, that someone reading these words will take them seriously, will follow the rules, will avoid the deep places and the dark hours and the structures that should not exist. Maybe you will survive where I could not. Maybe my failure will be your salvation. Maybe, if enough people learn to fear correctly, to respect the territories that are not theirs, to understand that we share this world with things we cannot comprehend or control, maybe the feeding will slow. Maybe the disappearances will decrease. Maybe a kind of balance can be restored. Or maybe not. Maybe nothing changes. Maybe the forest takes what it takes, and nothing we do makes any difference. I do not know. I will never know. But I tell the story anyway. I spread the fear. I honor the bargain I made on that frozen hillside, kneeling before things beyond imagination, agreeing to carry their message into the world of the living. The Black Hills are old. The forests are vast. The darkness holds things we cannot fight. Remember that. Fear that. And maybe, if you are lucky, you will never have to learn what I learned, never have to see what I saw, never have to carry the weight of knowledge that offers no protection and no peace. Stay in the light. Follow the rules. Trust your instincts when they scream at you to run. And if you ever find yourself in a forest after dark, if you ever see figures in your photographs who were not there when you took them, if you ever feel the temperature drop suddenly and smell something rotting on the wind, do not investigate. Just run, and do not stop. Run until the trees are behind you and the lights of civilization surround you and you can convince yourself, however falsely, that you are safe. Because safety is an illusion. But illusions are all we have. Illusions and rules, and the desperate hope that following them will keep us alive one more day. One more day. That is all any of us can hope for, now that those who watch have begun to wake. One more day in the light. One more night survived. One more dawn to greet with shaking hands and sleepless eyes and the knowledge, the terrible certain knowledge, that the darkness is patient and the darkness is hungry and the darkness never, ever forgets. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the truth about the Black Hills and every forest like them and the things that live in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond. Read it. Remember it. Fear it. And maybe, if you are very, very lucky, you will never understand just how true it really is. Because understanding comes at a cost. And once you pay that cost, you can never get it back. The forest is watching. It is always watching. And one day, it will come for all of us. I end this account not with hope, not with resolution, not with any comfort for those who have read this far. I end it with acknowledgement of the truth that I have tried, however imperfectly, to convey. We are not alone. We have never been alone. The wilderness holds things older than humanity, hungrier than wolves, more patient than stone. They tolerate us, they feed on us, they watch from shadows we refuse to see and claim territories we insist belong to us. The rules I have shared are not guarantees, they are not protections. They are simply the best practices developed by generations of rangers and guides and indigenous peoples who understood what most modern humans refuse to accept. That our dominion over nature is fiction. That we survive in the deep places only because something chooses to let us survive. And sometimes, for reasons we cannot fathom, they choose differently. Michelle Warren, David Chen, Rebecca and Marcus Foster, Ethan Cole, and the countless others in forests across this country and around the world who walked into wilderness and never came back. They are not lost. They are taken. They exist now in some state beyond our comprehension, claimed by beings who do not recognize our concepts of life or death. Pray for them if prayer gives you comfort, but understand that whatever receives those prayers may not be what you expect, may not be anything benevolent at all. This is the world we live in, the true world, beneath the comfortable surface of civilization and science and the rational explanations we tell ourselves to keep the fear at bay. The Black Hills are beautiful. Visit them, experience their majesty. Let the ancient ponderosa pines and granite spires remind you how small and temporary we are. But leave before dark. Always, always leave before dark. And never forget that you are being watched by something older than the hills, older than the trees, older than the land itself. Watching, waiting, hungry, patient, eternal. Those who watch from between. They are there. They are always there. And they will be there long after we are gone. Long after our cities crumble. Long after our species fades. Long after everything we built and believed and fought for returns to dust. They will still be there. Watching. Forever watching. And somewhere in the Black Hills, among the faceless ranks of the taken, Ethan Cole watches too. Waiting for me to join him. Waiting for all of us. In the end, the forest always wins. The forest always wins. The forest always wins. Remember that. And be afraid. This testimony is complete. I have nothing more to say, nothing more to warn, nothing more to give. The fear I carry is my burden now. The knowledge I possess is my curse. And the watching continues, day after day, night after night, without end. I am Jack Turner. I was a ranger. Now I am a witness. And this is the truth. Believe it or do not. But do not say you were not warned. Do not say you did not know. When the forest comes for you, when the darkness opens and the faceless figures emerge, and you feel cold hands gripping your arms and dragging you toward doorways that should not exist, remember these words. Remember that someone tried to tell you. Someone tried to save you. Someone carried this burden so that you might have a chance. Whether you took that chance, whether you followed the rules, whether you respected the boundaries between our world and theirs, that was your choice. I have done what I can. Now the rest is up to you. Stay safe. Stay in the light. And never, ever forget. The forest is watching. It is always watching. And it is very, very hungry. They installed motion sensor cameras throughout the Olympic National Forest after the disappearances started. Every camera captured the same thing at 3:33 a.m. Complete stillness, then static, then footage of us installing the cameras, filmed from behind us. We were always alone. My name is Daniel Carter, and I have been a park ranger in the Olympic National Forest for 14 years. I have seen hikers fall from cliffs, watched rescue teams pull bodies from rivers swollen with winter rain, and recovered remains so decomposed that dental records were the only means of identification. I have walked through fog so thick it felt like drowning, and navigated trails in darkness so absolute that my flashlight seemed like an insult to the void. I thought I understood these woods. I thought the forest had shown me all its horrors. I was catastrophically wrong. The disappearances began in early autumn when the leaves were just starting to turn and the first rains were washing away the dust of summer. 3 hikers in 2 weeks, all experienced, all prepared, all vanishing without a trace on different trails miles apart from each other. Search and rescue found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no signs of animal attack or natural disaster. Just empty trails and an absence that grew heavier with each passing day. Thomas Reed was assigned to lead the investigation. He was a senior ranger, 22 years in the service, a man built like the old-growth trees that dominated this forest, solid, weathered, and seemingly eternal. His face was a map of scars and worry lines, his eyes the color of winter ice. He spoke rarely, but when he did, people listened. I had worked with him for a decade, trusted him with my life on more occasions than I could count. Caleb Foster was the 3rd member of our team. Younger than either of us, barely 30, but sharp as a hunting knife and twice as dangerous in the right circumstances. He had transferred from a ranger station in New Mexico the previous year, bringing with him stories of the desert that he rarely shared and a wariness in his eyes that never quite faded. There was something about Caleb, something I could not quite name, a tension that lived beneath his skin like a coiled spring. The 3 of us stood in the ranger station on that October evening, staring at the map covered in red pins marking the disappearance sites. The pins formed no pattern that made sense. Random trails, random elevations, random distances from roads and campsites. Whatever was taking these people was not following any logic we could understand. "The cameras," Thomas said, his voice low and gravel rough. "Headquarters is sending motion sensor cameras. We install them tomorrow along the trails, at the sites, everywhere we can think of. If something is out there, we catch it on film." I nodded, trying to ignore the chill that crept up my spine. There was something in the air that night, something that made the familiar walls of the station feel thin and inadequate. The wind was wrong, too warm for October, too still between the gusts. And beneath the silence, I could have sworn I heard something breathing, slow and patient, just beyond the range of my hearing. We set out at dawn the next morning, our packs heavy with equipment. The fog was thick, the kind that swallowed sound and made distances impossible to judge. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I had spent 14 years in these woods, and I knew their rhythms like I knew my own heartbeat. There should have been birds calling. There should have been squirrels chattering in the branches. Instead, there was only the soft crunch of our boots on the trail and the occasional drip of moisture from the canopy above. Thomas walked point, his rifle slung across his back, his eyes scanning the trees. Caleb brought up the rear, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm, his gaze flicking to the shadows with an intensity that made me nervous. I walked between them, carrying the case of cameras, trying to convince myself that the feeling of being watched was just paranoia, born of too little sleep and too many missing persons reports. We installed the first camera at a trailhead where the second hiker had begun his final journey. The device was simple enough, motion-activated, infrared-capable, weatherproof, and designed to run for weeks on battery power. Thomas bolted it to a tree at chest height, aimed it down the trail, and checked the feed on his tablet. The image was clear, the forest rendered in shades of green and gray. "1 down," he said. 49 to go. We moved deeper into the forest, following trails that wound through stands of Douglas fir and western red cedar, trees so massive that their trunks seemed like pillars holding up the sky. The fog grew thicker as we climbed, until we were walking through a world of white, the trees appearing and disappearing like ghosts. I kept checking my compass, kept counting my steps, kept telling myself that I knew exactly where we were. But I was lying. The forest felt wrong, changed. The trail seemed to curve in ways I did not remember, the landmarks appearing in the wrong order. I mentioned this to Thomas, and he stopped, frowning at his own map. "The creek should be here," he said, pointing to a spot where there was nothing but underbrush. "I've walked this trail 100 times. The creek is always here." Caleb moved past us, pushing through the ferns until he reached a slight depression in the ground. He knelt down, touching the earth with his fingers. "There was water here," he said. "Recently, the soil is still damp, but the creek is gone, like something drained it." We exchanged glances, none of us willing to say what we were thinking. Creeks did not just disappear. Water did not simply drain away overnight. Something was wrong here. wrong in a way that transcended missing hikers and strange silences. We continued installing cameras, working in silence now, the fog pressing in on all sides. By midday, we had covered 3 miles of trail and mounted 24 devices. We stopped for lunch at a small clearing, eating our rations without enthusiasm, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. That was when Caleb told us. "There are stories," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "from where I grew up, from the reservation, about things that walk in the woods, things that can look like people but are not people, things that should never be named out loud because naming them gives them power." Thomas snorted. "Native legends. Every culture has boogeyman stories." "These are not stories," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice that made both of us go still. "My grandmother saw one when she was young. It killed her brother, her parents, half her village, wore their skins, spoke with their voices. She was the only survivor because she knew the old words, the prayers that drive them back." "What are you saying?" I asked. Caleb looked at me, and in that moment, his face was not the face of a modern ranger, but something older, something that had seen truths that civilization had tried to bury. "I am saying that what is taking these people may not be human, may never have been human, and if I am right, our cameras will show us nothing but our own deaths." The forest around us seemed to grow darker, the fog pressing closer. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss Caleb's words as superstition born of isolation and fear. But something in me, some ancient instinct that predated logic and reason, knew he was telling the truth. We finished installing the cameras in near total silence, our movements quick and efficient, all of us wanting to be back at the station before nightfall. The sun was setting when we reached the final location, a stretch of trail near where the first hiker had vanished. The fog had lifted somewhat, replaced by long shadows that stretched across the path like reaching fingers. Thomas mounted the last camera while I held the ladder. Caleb stood watch, his rifle in his hands now, his eyes never resting on any one spot for more than a second. The device beeped once, indicating it was active, and Thomas climbed down. "Done," he said. "Now we wait and see what we catch." We made it back to the station just as full dark descended. The familiar sight of the building, its windows lit against the night, should have been comforting. Instead, I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the walls were made of paper and the locks were merely suggestions. We ate dinner without speaking, each of us lost in our own thoughts. When I finally fell into bed, sleep came reluctantly, haunted by dreams of fog and silence and something moving through the trees that had no face. The first footage arrived the next morning. Thomas was already at the computer when I woke, his face pale in the monitor's glow. He did not look up when I entered, did not acknowledge my presence until I stood directly behind him and saw what was on the screen. It was footage from Camera 7, one of the devices we had installed deep in the forest. The timestamp read 3:33 a.m. The image showed the trail at night, rendered in the green-gray of infrared. Everything was still. Nothing moved. The trees stood like sentinels, their branches motionless despite the wind that should have been blowing at that hour. Then static. Just for a moment, a burst of interference that made the image fragment into meaningless noise. And then the footage changed. It showed us, Thomas, Caleb, and me. We were installing the very camera that had recorded this footage, working in the fog from the previous morning. But the angle was wrong. The camera was showing us from behind, from a position in the trees that should have been impossible. We were filmed from 15 feet up in the air, looking down at our own backs as we worked. We had been alone that day. I was certain of it. There had been no one else on that trail, no sounds of movement, no indication that anything was watching us. But something had been there, something capable of climbing silently into the trees and recording us without any of us noticing. "There is more," Thomas said, his voice hollow. He clicked to the next file. Camera 12, same timestamp, 3:33 a.m., static, then footage of us again, this time from ground level, watching as Caleb mounted the device to a tree, again, filmed from behind, again, showing us from an angle that required the presence of someone or something we had not seen. Camera after camera, all with the same timestamp, all showing the same thing. Footage of us installing the cameras, recorded from positions that should have been empty. Sometimes from above, sometimes from the underbrush, sometimes from mere feet away. Close enough that we should have felt breath on our necks, close enough to touch. We had been watched the entire time. Whatever was out there had followed us for miles, stalked us through the fog, and we had never known. Caleb appeared in the doorway, his face drawn and gray. "Tell me there is another explanation," he said. "Tell me it is a malfunction, a glitch, something technical." Thomas shook his head slowly. "The cameras are working perfectly. The footage is clean. This is what they recorded." I wanted to speak, wanted to offer some rational explanation, but my throat was dry and my mind was blank. The fear I had been pushing down was rising now, a cold tide that threatened to drown all rational thought. "We need to go back out there," Thomas said. "Check the cameras, see if there is more footage. Maybe we can find tracks, some evidence of who or what was following us." "No," Caleb said sharply. "That is exactly what it wants. It is showing us this footage to draw us back in, to make us curious, make us careless. If we go back out there now, we will not come back." "Then what do you suggest?" Thomas asked. "We wait. We watch the footage as it comes in. We learn its patterns, its behaviors. And when we have enough information, we go to the elders, the medicine people, the ones who know how to fight these things." "You want us to consult witch doctors?" Thomas's voice dripped with scorn. "I want us to survive," Caleb snapped. "That thing out there is not a bear. It is not a cougar. It is something older, something that has been hunting in these forests since before your ancestors crawled out of caves. You want to face it with rifles and cameras? Go ahead. Die, stupid. But I know what I saw on that screen, and I know what it means." The argument might have continued, but the radio crackled to life. A static-filled voice, barely comprehensible, speaking in fragments. "This is Ranger Station 4. Requesting. Disappeared. Please respond." Thomas grabbed the handset. "Station 4. This is Station 1. Repeat your message. Over." More static, then a voice that sent ice down my spine. "Daniel." My name. Spoken clearly, without interference, in a voice I almost recognized. A voice that should not have been coming through that radio. "Daniel, we need your help. We are lost. So cold. Please come find us." Thomas looked at me, confusion and fear warring on his face. "Who is that?" I knew that voice. I knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, the way you know the face of your mother. It was the voice of Marcus Webb, one of the missing hikers, a man I had met briefly during his permit registration 3 weeks ago, a man who had vanished without a trace on a trail 20 miles from here, a man who should not have been speaking into a radio because he was almost certainly dead. "Please, Daniel," the voice continued, and now there was something wrong with it, something that made my stomach clench. "The forest is so dark. We cannot find our way. Come help us. Come into the trees." The transmission cut to static. We sat in silence, staring at the radio, none of us willing to speak. Finally, Caleb reached over and turned it off. "It knows your name," he said to me. "It is calling for you specifically. That is a very bad sign." "What does it mean?" "It means it has marked you, tasted something of you, maybe a hair you left on the trail, a drop of sweat, something with your essence in it. Now it is trying to draw you out, using a voice it stole from the dead." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is insane. Voices from the dead, creatures that steal faces. Listen to yourselves. We are park rangers, not characters in some horror story. There is a rational explanation for all of this." "Then explain it," Caleb said quietly. "Explain the footage. Explain the voice on the radio. Explain how something followed us for miles without any of us seeing or hearing anything." Thomas had no answer. None of us did. The next 3 days were a waking nightmare. We stayed inside the station, watching the camera feeds as they uploaded every 12 hours. Each batch brought new horrors, footage of the forest at night, empty and still, then static, then images that made no sense. A figure standing on the trail, too tall and too thin, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt to look at. A face pressed against the camera lens, features blurred by infrared but still recognizable. The face of Sarah Chen, the third missing hiker, a young woman who had come to the forest to photograph birds and never returned. Her eyes were too wide, her smile too broad. and there was something moving behind her teeth, something that glistened in the camera's light. And always, at 3:33 a.m., footage of us, sometimes installing the cameras, sometimes just standing in the forest, though we had not been there. Doppelgangers wearing our faces, staring at the camera with expressions that were almost human but not quite. My double smiled in one clip, a horrible rictus grin that split his face nearly to his ears, and I had to look away, my stomach churning. Caleb spent hours on satellite phone calls, speaking in a language I did not understand, his voice low and urgent. When I asked him what he was doing, he said only that he was consulting people who knew more than we did. Thomas refused to participate in what he called superstitious nonsense. He spent his time going over the footage frame by frame, looking for evidence of tampering, trying to prove that someone was playing an elaborate hoax. But the metadata was clean, the cameras were functioning correctly, the footage was real. On the fourth night, Caleb gathered us together. "I spoke to my grandmother," he said. "She is old now, very old, but she remembers. She told me what we are dealing with." He paused, and I could see the fear in his eyes, fear mixed with something that might have been resignation. "We call them Ye Naldlushi, the ones who walk on 4 legs, though they can walk on 2 when they choose. Skinwalkers." The word hung in the air like a curse. "They were once human," Caleb continued. "Powerful medicine people who turned to darkness, who murdered their own families to gain the power to transform. They can become animals, coyotes, wolves, owls, crows. But their true power is imitation. They can wear the skins of those they kill, speak with their voices, mimic their movements. They use these disguises to get close to their prey, to earn trust, to draw victims into the forest where no one can hear them scream." "That is madness," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The footage proves otherwise. Those things wearing our faces are not us. They are copies, constructs, things the Skinwalker made to confuse and terrify. It is testing us, learning our weaknesses. When it has learned enough, it will come for us." "How do we stop it?" Caleb shook his head. "I do not know if we can. My grandmother said the old prayers can drive them back, but only temporarily. The only way to truly kill a Skinwalker is to learn its true name, the name it had when it was still human. Speak that name, and you can destroy it. But these creatures are old, some of them centuries old. Their true names have been lost to time." "Then we are helpless," I said, despair creeping into my voice. "Not entirely. There are protections. White ash, certain herbs burned as incense, and we must never, ever go outside after dark. The Skinwalker is strongest at night, especially during the hour of 3:33. That is when the barrier between worlds is thinnest, when their power is at its peak. We reinforced the station as best we could, covering the windows with whatever we could find, burning sage and cedar in every room. Thomas objected to each precaution, but his objections grew weaker as the nights passed. He had seen the footage. He knew something unnatural was happening, even if he could not bring himself to name it. On the 6th night, I woke to the sound of someone knocking on the door. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I lay frozen in my bunk, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clock on the wall read 3:31 a.m. "Daniel," Thomas's voice coming from outside. "Daniel, open the door. I went for a walk and I got locked out. Please, it is cold." I knew it was not Thomas. Thomas was in the bunk above me. I could hear him breathing, the slow rhythm of deep sleep, but the voice was perfect, every inflection, every cadence. "Daniel, please. I am frightened. There is something in the trees. Let me in." I did not move, did not breathe. The knocking came again, harder this time, the door shaking in its frame. "Daniel, let me in." The voice was changing now, losing its human qualities, becoming something deeper and more resonant. I could hear other sounds beneath it, a clicking and chittering like insects, a wet sliding that made my skin crawl. "I know you are awake, Daniel. I can smell your fear. So sweet, so rich. Open the door and let me taste it." Thomas woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in his bunk. Caleb was already awake, I realized, standing by the door with his rifle raised. "Do not listen to it," Caleb whispered. "Do not respond. Do not even look at the door." The pounding continued, growing more frantic. The wood groaned, splinters appearing around the hinges. Whatever was out there was strong, impossibly strong. "Let me in! Let me in! Let me in! Let me in!" The words blurred together into a howl, rising in pitch until it was a shriek that seemed to pierce my skull. I covered my ears, but it made no difference. The sound was inside my head, burrowing into my brain like a living thing. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence. Complete and absolute. Caleb moved to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. His face went white. "Dear God," he whispered. I joined him, unable to resist despite my terror, and I saw it. The thing standing in the clearing was not human. It might have been once, long ago. But whatever humanity it had possessed was gone now, burned away by centuries of dark magic and darker hungers. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body gaunt and stretched, covered in skin that might have been leather or might have been something worse. Its arms hung past its knees, ending in hands with too many fingers, each tipped with a claw that gleamed in the moonlight. Its face was the worst part. It had Thomas's face, my face, Caleb's face, all of them at once, the features shifting and flowing like wax on a hot day. And where its eyes should have been, there were only pits of absolute darkness, holes in reality that seemed to drink in the light. It stared at the window, at me, and it smiled. The smile split its face in half, revealing rows of teeth that spiraled back into a throat that seemed to go on forever. A tongue emerged, long and black and forked, tasting the air between us. Then it turned and walked into the forest, its movements wrong, its joints bending in directions that should have been impossible. In seconds, it had vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of its laughter hanging in the air. None of us slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, we made a decision. We could not stay in the station any longer, waiting to be picked off one by one. We needed to reach the main road, 20 miles away, and get help, real help. Police, military, someone with the resources to deal with this thing. Thomas argued for leaving immediately, while we had daylight. Caleb insisted we wait until noon, when the sun was at its highest and our enemy would be at its weakest. In the end, we compromised, setting out at 10 in the morning, our packs loaded with supplies and weapons. The forest was different in daylight, still wrong, still twisted in subtle ways that made navigation difficult, but at least we could see. We moved quickly, following the main trail toward the trailhead where our vehicles were parked. Thomas led, his rifle ready. I walked in the middle, carrying the emergency radio. Caleb brought up the rear, his eyes never still, watching for any sign of pursuit. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. The silence continued, the absence of wildlife pressing down on us, but we saw no sign of the creature. I began to hope that we might actually make it. Then Thomas stopped. "The trail," he said. "It is gone." I moved up beside him and saw what he meant. The path we had been following simply ended, terminating in a wall of undergrowth so thick that it looked like it had been there for centuries. That was impossible. We had walked this trail dozens of times. It was one of the main routes through the forest. "It is changing the forest," Caleb said, "bending it to trap us. We need to go off trail, use compass bearings to navigate." We pushed through the undergrowth, struggling against branches that seemed to grab at our clothes and vines that tangled around our ankles. The going was slow, exhausting. Every 100 yards felt like a mile, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger, pressing against my sanity like a physical weight. At noon, we stopped to rest and eat. Caleb performed some kind of ritual, drawing symbols in the dirt and muttering in his native language. Whether it provided any actual protection, I could not say, but it seemed to calm him, and that was something. We had just finished eating when Thomas stood up, frowning at the trees. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I listened. At first there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound. Crying. A child crying, somewhere ahead of us. "Please," a young voice called. "Please help me. I am lost. I am so scared." Caleb grabbed my arm before I could move. "No, it is a trick. The creature imitating a child to draw us off course." "But what if it is real?" I asked. "What if there is actually a child out there who needs help?" "There is no child. There never was. The hikers who vanished, they were all adults. No children have been reported missing. This is a lie, Daniel, a trap." The crying continued, growing louder, more desperate. Every instinct in me screamed to go help, to find the source of that sound and offer comfort. But I remembered the voice on the radio, Marcus Webb, calling my name. A dead man, using my trust against me. "We keep moving," Thomas said, his voice tight. "Caleb is right. We cannot fall for its tricks." We pressed on, the crying following us, sometimes seeming to come from the left, sometimes the right, sometimes directly ahead. After an hour it stopped, replaced by a silence that was somehow worse. The sun was setting when we reached the edge of a clearing. On the other side, maybe 50 yards away, I could see the trailhead. Our vehicles were there, exactly where we had left them a week ago. Safety was within reach. "We made it," Thomas breathed. "Wait," Caleb said sharply. "Something is wrong." I looked more closely at the clearing. At first, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed the footprints. Hundreds of them covering the ground, all leading into the forest. And in the center of the clearing, sitting on a fallen log, was a figure. It looked like a man. He was wearing a ranger uniform, his back to us, his head bowed. He was not moving. "Stay here," Thomas said. "I will check it out." "Thomas, no." I grabbed his arm. It could be a trap. Or it could be one of the missing hikers, injured and waiting for rescue. I am not leaving someone behind. He shrugged off my grip and stepped into the clearing. I watched, my heart in my throat as he approached the figure. 10 yards. 5. He reached out a hand to touch its shoulder. The figure turned. It was Thomas. A perfect copy of Thomas, wearing his face, his uniform, his expression of concern. But its eyes were wrong, dark pits that reflected no light. And when it smiled, its teeth were too long, too sharp. The real Thomas stumbled backward, raising his rifle. "What the hell?" The copy moved faster than should have been possible. One moment it was sitting on the log, the next it was on top of Thomas, bearing him to the ground. I heard him scream, heard the wet sound of tearing, and then the creature was rising, Thomas's blood dripping from its claws. Thomas was not moving. His throat had been torn out, his face frozen in an expression of disbelief. He was dead. Just like that, in the space of a heartbeat, our leader was gone. Caleb grabbed me, dragging me back into the trees. "Run," he hissed. "Run now." I ran. Branches tore at my face, roots grabbed at my feet, but I ran. Behind me, I could hear something pursuing, crashing through the underbrush with terrible speed. Caleb was beside me, his breath ragged, his face a mask of terror. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We collapsed in a hollow between the roots of an ancient cedar, gasping for breath, listening for any sign of pursuit. For a long moment, there was only the sound of our breathing. Then a voice came from the darkness. "Daniel, Caleb, where are you going? The forest is no place to be alone at night." Thomas's voice, perfect, unchanged, as if he had not just died, as if his throat had not been ripped out in front of our eyes. "Come out," the voice continued. "Let me help you. Let me take you somewhere safe." Caleb pressed a hand over my mouth, his eyes wide with warning. We stayed still, barely breathing, as the footsteps came closer. I could see something moving through the trees, a shape that was almost Thomas but not quite. Too tall, too thin. Its movements wrong, joints bending backward, head tilting at an impossible angle. It stopped 10 feet from our hiding place. I could see its face now, Thomas's face, but the skin was too smooth, too pale, and the eyes were those dark pits that seemed to drink in all light. "I can smell you," it said, and its voice was no longer Thomas's. It was something older, deeper, echoing with centuries of hunger. "Your fear is so beautiful, so intoxicating. I have been watching you for so long, learning you, and now I know you better than you know yourselves." It inhaled deeply, its chest expanding in ways that should have been impossible. "You cannot hide from me, Daniel. You cannot run from me. I am everywhere. I am the trees and the fog and the silence between heartbeats. I am the fear that lives in your bones. And I am so very, very hungry." It reached toward our hiding place, its arms stretching, elongating, fingers growing longer and thinner until they were more like tendrils than digits. I closed my eyes, waiting for the touch that would mean my death. And then Caleb began to chant. The words were in no language I recognized, harsh and guttural, more like sounds than speech. But they had power. I could feel it in the air, a pressure that pushed back against the darkness, a warmth that cut through the cold terror. The creature recoiled, its arm snapping back, its stolen face twisting in what might have been pain. "Old words," it hissed. "From the old times. You know the songs of my enemies." Caleb did not stop chanting. The words flowed from him like water, each one a blow against the thing that wore Thomas's skin. The creature screamed, a sound that was not human and never had been, a sound that burrowed into my skull and tried to tear my sanity apart. And then it was gone. Melting back into the shadows, its form dissolving into the darkness from which it had come. The last thing I saw was Thomas's face, looking at me with an expression of terrible hunger. Caleb collapsed against the tree roots, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "It will be back," he said. "The old words only drive it away. They do not destroy it. We have minutes, maybe less. What do we do? We find its true name. It is the only way." "How?" "You said its name has been lost for centuries." Caleb looked at me, and in the darkness, his eyes were bright with something that might have been hope or might have been madness. "The cameras," he said. "The footage. It has been watching us for days, playing games, showing us pieces of itself. Maybe it has shown us more than it meant to. Maybe somewhere in that footage is a clue to who it was before it became what it is now." It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one we had. We made our way back to the ranger station, navigating by starlight and prayer, expecting at any moment to feel claws ripping through our backs. But the creature did not pursue us. Perhaps Caleb's words had weakened it. Perhaps it was simply enjoying the chase, savoring our terror. We reached the station just before dawn, bursting through the door and slamming it behind us. I went immediately to the computer, pulling up all the camera footage we had collected over the past week. Caleb watched the windows, his rifle ready, his lips moving in silent prayer. I watched every clip, frame by frame, looking for anything that might tell us who this creature had once been. Most of the footage was useless, just shots of empty forest and our own doppelgangers smiling their terrible smiles. But in one clip, I found something. It was footage from camera 7, the first one we had installed. The timestamp was 3:33 a.m., like all the others. The image showed the creature standing on the trail, its form shifting and flowing. But behind it, barely visible in the shadows, was something else. A cabin. An old cabin, falling apart, abandoned for decades. And on the door of the cabin, barely legible, was a name carved into the wood. I zoomed in, enhanced the image, pushed the technology to its limits. The letters were faded, worn by time, but they were there. William Crane. I spoke the name aloud without thinking, the syllables feeling strange on my tongue. And somewhere outside the station, something screamed. "You found it," Caleb breathed, his face a mixture of relief and terror. "You found its name." The creature was coming. I could hear it crashing through the forest, could feel its rage pulsing against the walls of the station. It knew what we had discovered. It knew we had the weapon to destroy it. The door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by force beyond anything natural. The creature stood in the doorway, no longer wearing Thomas's face or any human form. Its true shape was revealed now, a nightmare of angles and darkness, a being that should not exist in any sane universe. "You speak my name," it howled, and its voice was thunder and earthquake and the dying screams of every victim it had ever claimed. "But speaking is not enough. You must know, you must understand, you must remember." It surged forward, and Caleb stepped in front of me, raising his rifle, firing again and again. The bullets passed through the creature without effect, disappearing into its impossible body. I closed my eyes and thought about the name. William Crane. Who had he been? What had he done to become this thing? I reached for knowledge I did not have, understanding I could not possess. And something answered. Images flooded my mind. A man in the early 1800s, a fur trapper working the Olympic Peninsula. William Crane, born in 1783, died in 1821. But he did not die. He made a bargain, traded his humanity for power, murdered his wife and children in a cabin in the deep woods, and used their deaths to fuel his transformation. I saw it all, his crimes, his corruption, his descent into something that had no name because names were for things that belonged to the natural world. I understood him, knew him, and in that moment, I was him, a fragment of my soul touching the darkness that had consumed his. "William Crane!" I shouted, my voice carrying power I did not know I possessed. "I name you. I know you. You were a man once. You were William Crane, and you are remembered." The creature froze. Its form began to shake, to crack, light spilling from fissures in its impossible body. "I see your wife, Margaret. I see your sons, Jacob and Samuel. They remember too. They have been waiting for you, waiting for justice." The creature screamed again, but this time there was no rage in it, only fear, only the terror of something that had escaped death for 2 centuries finally facing its reckoning. "You are William Crane," I said one final time, "and your time in this world is over." The creature exploded. There is no other word for it. Its form burst apart into fragments of shadow that dissolved in the morning light streaming through the broken doorway. Where it had stood, there was only emptiness, only absence, only the lingering echo of a scream that faded into nothing. I collapsed to the floor, every ounce of strength drained from my body. Caleb was beside me, his face pale but alive, his eyes filled with tears I did not understand. "It is over," he whispered. "You destroyed it. The old stories said it could be done, but I never believed, never truly believed." I wanted to respond, wanted to say something meaningful about survival and courage and the power of knowledge. But I was too tired, too broken, too aware of everything we had lost. Thomas was dead. 3 hikers were dead. A monster that had preyed on this forest for 2 centuries had finally been stopped. But at what cost? We stayed in the station until help arrived, summoned by the emergency beacon Caleb had activated during the fight. The Park Service came first, then the police, then federal agents in unmarked cars who asked questions we could not answer. They found Thomas's body in the clearing, found evidence of the other victims, found enough to classify this as an unexplained incident in files that would never be released to the public. I tried to tell them what really happened, tried to explain about William Crane and the Skinwalker and the cameras that captured our deaths before they happened. They smiled politely and wrote things in their notebooks and talked about trauma and psychological evaluation. But Caleb believed me, and somewhere in a nursing home on a reservation in New Mexico, an old woman believed me too. I left the Park Service a month after the incident. I could not go back into those woods, could not face the trees and the fog and the silence that would forever remind me of what lurked in the darkness. I moved to a city, as far from the forest as I could get, and took a job that kept me surrounded by people and noise and artificial light. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the knocking. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I still hear voices calling my name, voices that belong to the dead, begging me to open the door and let them in. And sometimes, at exactly 3:33 a.m., I wake from dreams of fog and shadows and a creature with too many faces smiling at me from the edge of my vision. The Skinwalker is dead. I killed it. I spoke its true name and watched it dissolve into nothingness. But names have power, and speaking a name aloud can attract attention. I named William Crane, and in naming him, I touched something vast and dark and hungry, something that noticed me, something that is still watching. The cameras in the Olympic National Forest still run. New rangers maintain them, unaware of what happened to their predecessors. And sometimes, the footage shows something strange. A figure in the trees, too tall and too thin. A face pressed against the lens, smiling with too many teeth. Footage of the living filmed from impossible angles, watched by something that should not exist. I review that footage sometimes, searching for patterns, looking for signs that another creature has taken William Crane's place. The forest is old, and there are dark things dwelling in its depths, things that have been there since before humanity crawled out of the caves. Things that are patient and hungry and very, very good at waiting. Thomas Reed is buried in a cemetery in Seattle. His headstone says, "Beloved Ranger and Friend," and makes no mention of how he died. His family believes it was a bear attack. They cannot handle the truth. No one can. Caleb Foster returned to New Mexico, to his grandmother and his people, and the old ways that saved our lives. We talk sometimes, exchanging letters that say nothing important, never speaking directly about what we experienced. The words are too dangerous, the memories too raw, and I sit here in my apartment in the city, surrounded by concrete and steel and millions of people who have never known true darkness, writing this account that no one will ever believe. I write it because someone has to, because the truth matters, even if it is terrible. Because William Crane was not the only skinwalker, and somewhere out there, in the forests and the deserts and the wild places where humans fear to tread, others are waiting. They have been waiting for centuries. They have patience that spans generations, and they are always, always watching. If you are reading this, if you have made it through this account of horror and loss and impossible things, I have one piece of advice for you. Stay out of the deep woods. Stay where there are lights and people and the comfortable illusion of safety, because the darkness is real and there are things in it that hunger for human flesh and human fear and human souls. The cameras captured our deaths before they happened. Every camera showed the same thing at 3:33 a.m. Static, then stillness, then footage of us installing the cameras, filmed from behind us. We were always alone, but we were never, not for a single moment, unwatched. And neither are you. The forest remembers. The forest waits. And somewhere in the shadows between the trees, something is smiling, patient and eternal, knowing that sooner or later you will come to it. They always do. This is my testimony, my warning, my confession. Believe it or not, that is your choice. But remember this story when you hear knocking at your door in the dead of night. Remember it when you see movement in the corner of your eye that vanishes when you turn to look. Remember it when you feel eyes on the back of your neck in empty rooms and silent forests. Remember William Crane. Remember what he became. And remember that he was not the first, and he will not be the last. The skinwalkers walk among us still, and they know your name. The abandoned fire lookout tower at the northern edge of Coconino National Forest has been empty since 1962. Last month, someone filed an accurate weather report from that tower's radio frequency. The atmospheric pressure readings matched perfectly. The wind speed calculations were precise to the decimal. No one was up there. My name is Andrew Miller, and I have been a park ranger in Coconino National Forest for 14 years. I have seen hikers succumb to heat exhaustion on summer trails, found bodies frozen solid during unexpected winter storms, and pulled what remained of campers from ravines after they wandered too close to unstable edges. I have tracked mountain lions through dense ponderosa stands and tranquilized black bears that grew too comfortable around human food. I thought the Arizona wilderness had shown me everything it was capable of showing. I was catastrophically wrong. The morning we received orders to investigate the phantom radio transmissions, the forest felt different. Nathan Ford noticed it first. He was my partner for this assignment. A lean man in his early 30s with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet competence that made him invaluable in dangerous situations. We had worked together for 3 years, and I trusted him more than I trusted anyone else in the service. "Something's off," Nathan said as we loaded our packs into the truck. "Listen." I stopped and listened. The parking area at the ranger station was usually alive with sound at this hour. Ravens calling from the roof, ground squirrels chattering in the underbrush, the distant hum of insects. But that morning, there was nothing. Just silence, thick and oppressive, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. "Probably a predator nearby," I said, not believing it. "Mountain lion, maybe." Nathan shook his head slowly. "Mountain lions don't silence everything for a quarter mile. This is different." He was right. I had spent enough years in this forest to recognize normal quiet, and whatever this was did not qualify. This felt intentional. This felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. We drove for 2 hours on increasingly deteriorated forest roads, the truck bouncing over ruts and exposed roots. The tower was located in one of the most remote sections of the park, accessible only by a network of old logging roads that had not been maintained since the 1970s. Trees pressed close on either side, ponderosa pines rising like ancient columns, their orange bark glowing in the morning light. Between them grew thickets of manzanita and scrub oak, dense enough to hide anything that wanted to remain hidden. The radio tower came into view around noon, rising above the tree canopy like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. It was a relic from another era, built when fire lookouts still manned these posts for months at a time, scanning the horizon for smoke. Now it stood abandoned, its windows dark, its ladder rusted, its purpose obsolete in an age of satellite imagery and drone surveillance. Except someone or something had used its radio equipment 3 weeks ago to file a report so accurate that the Meteorological Service had flagged it for review. We parked at the base of the tower and stepped out into that unnatural silence. Nathan immediately drew his sidearm, scanning the tree line. I did the same, my hand finding the grip of my service weapon with practiced ease. "You smell that?" Nathan whispered. I inhaled deeply and nearly gagged. There was something in the air, a thick, musky odor like wet fur mixed with decay, underlaid with something sharper that I could not identify. It was not the smell of any animal I recognized, not bear, not cat, not deer, something else entirely. "Could be a dead animal," I said, but my voice carried no conviction. "That's not death," Nathan replied. "That's something alive." We approached the tower cautiously, our weapons raised. The structure was in worse condition than I remembered from my last visit years ago. The wooden supports were gray with age, some of them cracked and leaning. The ladder that led up to the observation platform looked barely functional, several rungs missing or broken. But what caught my attention were the marks. Deep gouges ran down the support posts, 4 parallel scratches that bit into the wood and exposed the pale interior. They started about 7 feet up and ran down to chest height. Some were old, weathered gray. Others were fresh, the wood still showing raw and new. "Claw marks," Nathan said quietly. "What the hell has claws that big?" I knelt down and examined the base of the nearest post. The ground around it was disturbed, the pine needles scattered, the dirt pressed down in patterns that took me a moment to recognize. Footprints. But not like any footprints I had ever seen. They were long and narrow, almost like a dog's print but elongated, with clear toe impressions tipped with what looked like claw indentations. And they were enormous, easily 10 inches from heel to toe. "That's not a dog," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," Nathan agreed. "That's something walking on 2 legs." We found more prints around the base of the tower, a whole trail of them leading off into the forest. The stride length was impressive, easily 4 feet between prints. Whatever made these was tall, fast, and confident enough to leave such obvious evidence of its presence. I radioed base to report our findings, static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. More static. The radio had worked fine on the drive up, but now it seemed completely dead. "Sat phone," Nathan suggested. I pulled out the satellite phone, our backup communication device. It powered on normally, showed full signal bars, but when I tried to connect, nothing happened. Just dead air and that faint hiss that meant no connection was being made. "That's impossible," I said. "These phones work everywhere." "Yeah," Nathan replied grimly. "They do, unless something's interfering with them." We looked at each other, both of us understanding what this meant. We were on our own. Whatever was out here, whatever had made those prints and those claw marks, we would have to face it without backup. The decision to climb the tower was mine. Nathan argued against it, said we should retreat and come back with a full team, but I overruled him. We had been sent to investigate the phantom transmissions, and the only way to do that was to examine the radio equipment in the observation post. Besides, it was still daylight. Whatever was out here, surely it was more active at night. We had hours before dark. I was wrong about that too. The ladder creaked ominously as I climbed, each rung groaning under my weight. Nathan stayed at the base, his rifle raised, watching the tree line. The observation platform was about 40 feet up, accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. I pushed it open and pulled myself inside. The smell hit me first, that same musky odor but concentrated now, overwhelming. I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from retching. The observation post was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with windows on all sides offering panoramic views of the forest. A cot stood in one corner, its mattress torn to shreds. A small table held the radio equipment, surprisingly intact despite the destruction around it. and on the floor, dark stains spread across the wooden boards, stains that could only be dried blood. But there was no body, no remains of any kind, just blood and destruction and that terrible smell. I moved to the radio and examined it carefully. It was an old unit, vacuum tubes and analog dials, but someone had modified it recently. New wiring connected to what looked like a modern battery pack. The antenna cable was intact. I turned it on, and it hummed to life, the frequency dial glowing with soft amber light. "Miller!" Nathan's voice came from below, sharp with fear. "Get down here, now!" I scrambled to the trapdoor and looked down. Nathan was backing toward the ladder, his rifle pointed at the tree line. I followed his gaze and felt my blood turn to ice. They were emerging from the forest. Not one, not two, but at least 5 shapes, moving between the trees with a fluid grace that should have been impossible for creatures their size. They walked upright on 2 legs, but they were not human. Their bodies were covered in thick gray and brown fur. Their heads were wrong, elongated and narrow, with pointed ears and long snouts filled with teeth that caught the afternoon light. Their eyes glowed amber, reflecting like an animal's eyes, but with an intelligence behind them that was terrifying in its intensity. Dogmen. The legends were real. "Come on!" Nathan shouted, firing his rifle at the nearest creature. The shot hit it in the shoulder, and it stumbled back a step, more surprised than hurt. Then it threw back its head and howled, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest cavity, and the others answered, their voices joining in a chorus that echoed through the forest like the cry of something ancient and hungry. I descended the ladder so fast I nearly fell. Nathan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the truck. The creatures were closing in, moving with that loping gait, covering ground faster than anything on 2 legs should be able to move. I fired twice, hitting one in the chest, but it kept coming. We reached the truck and threw ourselves inside. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I floored the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the pine needles before finding traction. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing where we had been, not pursuing, just watching with those glowing amber eyes. What the hell were those? Nathan's voice was shaking. What the hell were those things? I don't know, I replied, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had turned white. But we need to get back and report this. We drove for 10 minutes before the road ended. Not reached a junction, not became impassable. Ended. Where there should have been a clear path continuing through the forest, there was nothing but a wall of fallen trees, massive ponderosas piled across the road in a barrier that would take heavy equipment to clear. That wasn't here this morning, Nathan said quietly. No, it wasn't. They had blocked our escape. They had let us in, and now they were making sure we could not get out. We tried the radio again. Static, the satellite phone. Dead. We were trapped in this forest with creatures that should not exist, with no way to call for help and no way to escape. There's another road, I said, pulling out my map. It joins up with the main forest road about 8 miles east. If we can get there before dark, we might be able to make it out. Nathan nodded grimly. Then we move. Now. We abandoned the truck and started hiking, moving as fast as we could through the dense undergrowth. The forest was still silent, that oppressive absence of sound that told me we were being watched. Occasionally, I would catch movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow sliding between trees, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, 2 hours to cover 8 miles of rough terrain with those things tracking us. We made it about 4 miles before they showed themselves again. Nathan was in the lead, pushing through a thicket of manzanita, when he suddenly stopped. I almost walked into his back. "Miller," he whispered, "look." Ahead of us, standing in a small clearing, was the largest creature I had ever seen. It was at least 8 feet tall, its shoulders impossibly broad, its arms hanging past its knees. Its fur was darker than the others, almost black, and its eyes burned with that same amber light. It stood perfectly still, watching us, its long snout slightly open to reveal teeth that were designed for tearing flesh. Behind us, I heard movement. I spun around. 2 more of them, blocking our retreat. To our left, another. To our right, 2 more. We were surrounded. "Stay calm," I said, more to myself than to Nathan. They're territorial. Maybe they just want us to leave. The large one in front of us took a step forward. Its movements were deliberate, controlled, almost ceremonial. It raised one massive hand and pointed at Nathan. "What does it want?" Nathan asked, his voice cracking. "I don't know." It pointed again, more insistently this time. Then it made a sound, a low, guttural vocalization that was not quite a growl and not quite a word, but somehow managed to convey meaning. It wanted Nathan, specifically Nathan. "Like hell," I said, raising my rifle. Everything happened at once. The creature lunged forward with speed that defied its size. Nathan fired, the shot going wide. I fired too, hitting it in the chest, but it did not slow down. Its hand closed around Nathan's arm, and I heard the snap of breaking bone. Nathan screamed, a sound of pure agony that I will hear in my nightmares until the day I die. I kept firing, emptying my magazine into the creature. It snarled, a sound of irritation more than pain, and swung its other arm. The blow caught me in the chest and sent me flying backward. I hit a tree trunk, the impact driving the air from my lungs, and collapsed to the ground. When I could see again, they were dragging Nathan into the forest. He was still screaming, fighting with his good arm, his legs kicking uselessly. The creatures moved with that terrible grace, carrying him as easily as a man might carry a child. I tried to stand, tried to follow, but my body would not respond. I could only watch as they disappeared into the trees, Nathan's screams fading until finally, horribly, they stopped. I do not know how long I lay there. Minutes, hours. The sky darkened from orange to purple to black. The stars came out, cold and distant, indifferent to the horror that had just occurred. Eventually, I managed to pull myself to my feet. My chest ached where the creature had struck me, probably cracked ribs, and my head pounded from hitting the tree. But I was alive. Nathan was not. I started moving, stumbling through the darkness, heading in what I hoped was the direction of the secondary road. I had lost my rifle in the attack, but still had my sidearm and my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating only a few feet of forest ahead of me. Beyond that, nothing but black. The howling started around midnight. It came from all directions, a chorus of voices rising and falling in patterns that almost sounded like language. They were calling to each other, communicating, coordinating, and they were getting closer. I ran, or tried to run. My injured chest made it agony, but fear pushed me forward. The forest blurred around me, branches tearing at my clothes, roots trying to trip me. Behind me, I could hear them, those heavy footfalls, those low growls. They were playing with me. They could have caught me easily, but chose not to. Not yet. The road appeared suddenly, a pale ribbon of gravel cutting through the darkness. I stumbled onto it and started running downhill, praying that it led to the main road, to civilization, to safety. The howling grew louder, closer. I could smell them now, that musky stench filling my nostrils. Headlights appeared around a bend in the road. A truck, someone driving through the forest at night. I waved my arms, shouted, stepped into the middle of the road. The truck slowed, stopped. The door opened, and a man stepped out, an older ranger I did not recognize. "Are you okay?" he asked. "What happened?" I tried to explain, to tell him about the creatures, about Nathan, but the words came out jumbled, incoherent. He helped me into the truck, said he would radio for help, started driving. I looked back through the rear window and saw them at the edge of the road, 5 or 6 pairs of amber eyes glowing in the darkness, watching us leave. They let me go, just like they had let me go the first time. They could have killed me easily, but they chose not to. I was not a threat. I was running away. But Nathan had fought back, had injured one of them, and they had taken him for it. The official report said equipment failure and animal attack. Nathan Ford was listed as missing, presumed dead, victim of an unknown predator. No body was ever recovered. No one believed my account of what really happened. They sent me for psychological evaluation, diagnosed me with PTSD, gave me mandatory leave. But I know what I saw. I know what took Nathan, and I know they are still out there, in the deep forests of Coconino, in places where humans rarely venture. They have been there longer than we have, longer perhaps than any of the native peoples who first told stories about them. The Navajo call them Maiko, the wolf people. The Apache have legends of shapeshifters, creatures that are neither human nor animal, but something in between. Every culture that has lived in these lands has stories about them. I thought they were myths. Campfire tales meant to frighten children and entertain tourists. But myths do not leave footprints. Myths do not drag screaming men into the darkness. Myths do not watch you with intelligent amber eyes that seem to understand exactly what they are doing. 3 months after the incident, I returned to the tower. I do not know why. Maybe I needed to see it again, to confirm that it had really happened, that I was not losing my mind. I went alone, during the day, armed with everything I could carry. The tower was exactly as we had left it, except for one thing. On the observation platform, arranged in a neat pile, I found Nathan's gear. His pack, his radio, his weapon, and his wallet, with his ID card still inside. They had returned his belongings, placed them where we would find them. A message, a warning. I also found new marks on the tower posts, fresh gouges that had not been there before. And in the dirt at the base, more footprints, different sizes this time, suggesting multiple individuals, adults and juveniles, a family group perhaps. They had come back to check on their territory, to make sure we had understood their message. I understood. I understood perfectly. These are not mindless beasts. They are intelligent, organized, and fiercely territorial. They have learned to avoid detection, to stay in the deep places where humans rarely go. They understand our technology, our weaknesses, our patterns. The modified radio in the tower suggests they may have watched humans for generations, learning, adapting. Those phantom transmissions were not accidents. They were tests, or perhaps invitations. Nathan always said the forest felt different that day. He was right. It felt different because we were being evaluated. They wanted to see how we would respond, what we would do, how much we knew. And when they determined that we knew too little to be useful and too much to be ignored, they acted accordingly. I think about Morrison, the man whose belongings we found in the tower. There was no Morrison on the ranger roster. I checked every employee, every volunteer, every contractor who had ever worked in Coconino National Forest. No David Morrison. But someone had been living in that tower, someone who knew enough about weather patterns to file accurate reports, someone who had modified the radio equipment with modern technology, someone who may have been studying these creatures, or may have been one of their captives, forced to work for reasons I cannot begin to understand. The blood on the platform floor was never tested. The official report said contamination made analysis impossible. But I believe that was a lie. Another part of the cover-up that has kept these creatures hidden for so long. Someone in the service knows the truth. Someone has known for decades. The protocol changes that came after my incident, the new safety measures and communication requirements, those did not come from my testimony alone. They came from someone who understood the threat and wanted to minimize exposure without actually acknowledging what was out there. I have met others since then, other rangers who have had encounters they cannot explain. We do not talk about it openly, but we recognize each other, the haunted look in the eyes, the way we scan the tree line even in broad daylight. There is an unofficial network, whispers and rumors, stories shared over drinks after official events. The creatures go by many names in these discussions. Dogmen, skinwalkers, the beast of Bray Road. Different regions, different names, but the descriptions are always the same. Tall, canine, bipedal, intelligent, and deadly. I have tried to warn people. I have written reports, given testimonies, contacted researchers who study these phenomena. Some listen. Most dismiss me as a traumatized man who saw something he could not explain and invented monsters to fill the gap. That is their right. I cannot force anyone to believe. But I can tell my story, again and again, until someone with the power to do something finally listens. Nathan Ford deserved better than an unmarked grave in some creature's territory. He deserved recognition, acknowledgement, justice. Instead, he got a bureaucratic notation in a file that will gather dust until it is eventually destroyed. Missing, presumed dead. 4 words to summarize a life, a career, a friendship. I still have his wallet. I took it from the tower that day, tucked it into my pocket before I climbed back down. His wife has his other things, the official belongings that the service returned to her. But the wallet, With his ID card still inside, I kept a reminder, a promise. I will not let his death be forgotten, even if I am the only one who remembers what really happened. The fire lookout tower at Coconino National Forest remains abandoned. No one will man it now, not after what happened. The official story is structural damage, safety concerns, budget priorities. The real reason is that everyone who has spent any time near that tower has felt it, that oppressive silence, that sense of being watched, that smell, musky and sharp, drifting on the wind when there should be no wind. They are still there, waiting, watching, protecting their territory with the same fierce determination they have shown for centuries. And every time some hiker goes missing in the deep forest, every time a camper vanishes without a trace, I wonder if they have claimed another victim, another intruder in their domain, another sacrifice to their ancient hunger. I left the Ranger Service 6 months after the incident. I could not continue, could not walk those trails knowing what was out there. I moved to Phoenix, found work as a security consultant, tried to build a normal life. But normal is impossible when you have looked into those amber eyes and seen the intelligence there, the calculation, the patient, predatory awareness. They let me live for a reason. I am certain of that now. They let me live so I could tell others, could spread the fear, could keep people away from their territory. I am their messenger, their warning system, their ambassador to a humanity that refuses to believe they exist. And in my nightmares, I see them watching me, nodding in approval, pleased that I am doing exactly what they intended. Nathan Ford was a good man. He was brave and capable, and did not deserve what happened to him. I hope his death was quick, though I do not really believe it was. The way they looked at him, the deliberate way they singled him out, suggests they had plans for him that went beyond simple predation. Maybe they wanted to study him the way we study animals. Maybe they wanted to make an example. Maybe their reasons are so alien that a human mind could never comprehend them. I tell his story because he cannot tell it himself. I tell his story because someone needs to know the truth about what lives in the forests of Arizona. I tell his story because the silence that follows every missing person case, every unexplained disappearance, every hiker who walked into the woods and never came back, that silence is complicity. We know something is out there. We have always known, and we choose to look away because the alternative is too frightening to contemplate. The howling still reaches me some nights, even here in the city. I hear it in my dreams, that chorus of voices calling to each other across the miles. Sometimes I wake up convinced they are right outside my window, their amber eyes gleaming in the streetlight. Sometimes I cannot shake the feeling that they are still watching, still waiting, still patient. Because they have time. They have centuries. They were here before the first humans crossed into these lands, and they will be here long after we are gone. We are temporary. They are eternal, and no amount of denial, no amount of covering up and looking away will change that fundamental truth. The forests keep their secrets. But this one demanded to be told. Nathan deserved that much. The truth deserved that much. And if even one person reads this account and thinks twice before venturing into the deep woods, then perhaps his sacrifice will not have been entirely in vain. My name is Andrew Miller. I was a park ranger in Coconino National Forest for 14 years. I saw what lives in those mountains, and I have spent every day since trying to warn people about it. Most do not believe. Most never will. But I keep telling the story anyway, because the alternative is silence, and in silence, they thrive. Listen carefully when you walk through forests. Pay attention to the sounds, and more importantly, to the absence of sounds. If the birds stop singing, if the insects go quiet, if that oppressive stillness settles over you like a weight, turn back. Do not investigate. Do not push forward. Just leave, as quickly and as quietly as you can. Because they are watching. They are always watching, and they are very, very patient. The abandoned tower stands empty against the Arizona sky, its windows dark, its radio silent once more. But sometimes, late at night, static crackles across the emergency frequencies, weather reports that no one filed, atmospheric readings that match perfectly with conditions on the ground, messages from a tower that has been abandoned for decades. Someone is still up there, or something, and it wants us to know it is watching.